Hi, welcome back to Jonesy Chats Wrestling. Once again, we're here for another review of this past week's wrestling, and I'm joined by a guest, my regular co-host, not even a guest this time, none other than Mr. Josh Hayes. How are you today, Josh?
I'm good, man. By the way, the cool part about this, I can't believe with the amount of traveling that I do, this is the first time I can say this. I'm doing this show remote today, so I can actually say I'm coming to you live from Cleveland, Ohio.
Wow, Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. But yeah, what we're going to do on the show today? Let's hit it up and see what we're going to do. So, going to hit this past week's Raw, NXT, and a couple of bits of breaking news as well. A lot of controversy, just the usual stuff, really. But let's start at the top. Let's get to Raw then. Okay, so Raw was this past week's Monday. Obviously, the show opens up with a tribute to Pat Patterson, and there was a lot of the same tribute what we saw on SmackDown. Clearly, it's still a hard-hitting loss to WWE and everybody. So I was a massive fan of this opening to the show. I think sometimes you've got to start the show with some serious nature, and I think this was a great tribute to start the show. What was your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing about it is I can't remember the last, wrestler, staff member, performer, anything that they've had to where this was his third tribute in a row because they had already done one on NXT and SmackDown, and then he still gets another full-length, like, tribute, 10-bell salute. They're doing highlights and stuff about him throughout the whole show. It just goes to show you how much the WWE family loved Pat Patterson and how important he was. They wanted to make sure by having all three different rosters out there to kick off the show that every single person involved in WWE had their chance to kind of, pay their respects and say their goodbyes to him.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a great tribute. A really massive fan of the video. Definitely going to keep that video. I think clearly it's a really sad loss to WWE, and I think they did a great job of paying tribute to the late Pat Patterson. As I said, we going into kind of the show then. So this is obviously the last Raw from the Thunderdome. Sort of obviously they're now moving to the Tropicana field as of yesterday's SmackDown. So obviously going into the show then. So the show starts. We've obviously got Randy Orton. Randy Orton comes out. Randy Orton this time has invited himself to the Firefly Funhouse, as we got a flashback from last week's Raw, where we had obviously Raw last week ending with Randy Orton picking up Alexa Bliss and then just passing to the Fiend. Clearly, obviously, they started this up. Orton and Wyatt basically trade insults for a large part of it. We get like a Firefly Funhouse. Bray Wyatt's then shown on set. He clearly does a cover to clarify why Alexa Bliss isn't there. And it just basically is just them trading insults really to build up the main event as such. What was your thoughts of this opening?
The thing about Bray Wyatt and the thing about the Firefly Funhouse and anything involved with that is that you can do things that on paper are kind of wacky, kind of dumb, but in that context, they're, I mean, like, yeah, the segment and the whole thing where like he played a game show or something like that, yeah, with anybody else that's straight up wrestle crap inductee worthy, but with Bray Wyatt I think it can work. And I thought it was pretty entertaining. And another thing I'll say is like I think there might have been some people who didn't like it, but it's interesting to me how there is a little bit of a double standard in wrestling, because the same people who didn't like the fact that that segment kind of kicked off the show after the Pat Patterson thing, those people probably had no issue with the Le Dîner Debonair that AEW did, which I the minute I saw that segment, I said if WWE had done something like this, people would have just run it right through the ground and said it was terrible. But I don't know. I enjoy Bray Wyatt, and what I do enjoy about it, what they set up in this segment, is that given that Bray Wyatt is almost like Mick Foley to where he's got two different personas, you can set up a match between Randy Orton and this Firefly Funhouse Bray Wyatt, and you're not even completely giving away the TLC match for free because it's been established how different of a character The Fiend is.
Yeah, no, fair points. Let me hit you on a couple of points there with that. So I'd agree with the fact that it's a fun opener. It obviously it sort of recovers from the somber starts of the show to a certain point. I get that this is one of the main angles. For me, what I found sort of I struggle with it is clearly the whole thing that you've got sort of at the end of last week, you've got Randy Orton basically feuding with the Fiend and then teasing that he's obviously got one up on the Fiend. I clearly felt that this sort of didn't follow on. It almost wasn't a carry on from last week. And I think clearly what was missing here was Alexa Bliss. Clearly she was off filming Pinky Brewster or something like that. Punky Brewster even. But I
I
get
didn't know that.
Yeah, so she was off this week filming Punky Brewster. But I think for me, it's okay building this up for a main event. But we got these guys facing each other. I know it's Bray Wyatt and it's not the Fiend in this main event. But for me, it was a bit sort of stale, and I'm getting a bit kind of sick of this Firefly Funhouse. I get it in small parts, but it just was okay for me. It didn't really excite me compared to the end of last week's Raw, where we had sort of that big cliffhanger. But it was just sort of what it was. Did you want to add anything else before we go on to the next segment?
One little thing, yeah. The one other thing that was a little cheesy, like they've always done it to where Bray Wyatt, when he's in the Funhouse, he has all these sound cues and music that goes along with him, even though he's supposed to be broadcasting from the Funhouse live. But I thought it was funny how when Randy Orton would respond, there was also music to match his responses, even though he's live in the ring. It's like the whole thing is just somehow queued up in real time.
Yeah, I think the problem with this Funhouse gimmick, I think the longer it kind of goes on, they're going to have to find different ways to extend the life of it to a certain point. I get it's fun, but for me, I think the fact that really what we should have had the Fiend kind of be, in my impression, I know he got his revenge at the end of the show, jumping ahead a bit, but for me, we should have the Fiend be really, really angry. I think the Firefly Funhouse should be the Fiend, really, because Fiend and Randy are going to be the ones at the pay-per-view, and the Fiend obviously got like sort of done over last week on Raw. He got sort of embarrassed to a certain point, but you've got Bray being fun and happy about it all. It didn't really work. It was almost like a different sort of week, a different story for me. But that was kind of my view of that. Did you want to move on, or have you got anything else you want to add?
I think what you said is fair. And the other thing that you said a second ago that I guess, that is true is like you said that it was stale for you. And even though I enjoyed it, it is one of those things to where they want to keep the Funhouse special. So they don't want to do it necessarily every single week. And yeah, I mean, I guess it is a little interesting that Randy Orton had to kind of be the one to challenge Bray Wyatt, and you didn't see any of that element that Bray Wyatt wanted a piece of Randy Orton for what he did to Alexa Bliss.
That's the thing. I think the thing with it is there wasn't really enough of the whole thing with sort of Randy going sort of I got one up on you. It was almost like he was too happy for this match, which he's a callous heel. He should be delaying this. But as I said, I think the main thing, as I said earlier, was the lack of Alexa Bliss. But WWE did an also on this one, and they did what they had to do. I guess it's a cover, but it was okay. You're sort of booing up your main event, so I'll give it that. I think it was okay, really.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We then went on to kind of our next segment. We had sort of Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax being shown backstage with the women's tag team titles. Nia Jax told Baszler to forget about last week and to focus on destroying Asuka. Jax destroyed Lana. She basically tore apart by a promo. Shayna said that Lana's front is going to look like a bat, basically, and her boobs will be around the other way, which I thought was a funny one line. And then obviously we then went into this match. What was your thoughts of the promo before we go into the match?
I mean, yeah, I thought, see, this is kind of what we're talking about. I thought this match and this promo kind of moved the feud forward in that we're getting a progression where obviously the feud is between Asuka and Lana and Jackson Baszler.
Yeah.
And so they're doing something they do a lot where they do a singles match between two people from those teams. And I mean, Shayna Baszler, well, I was going to talk about the match, but you do that first.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'd say for the promo, it did what it needed to do. It's further hyping up this feud. For me, regarding this whole sort of match and the feud that we've got at the moment, clearly going to the women's tag team titles at TLC. As I said, it's a bit stale for me. We've seen this match quite a few times, this whole dynamic of tag teams. So we've seen Asuka, Lana, Nia Jax, Shayna Baszler. They've already had 2 tag team matches against each other, one week after another. November 23rd, November 30th, we saw it. We saw sort of all this, and it's just the same thing again and again. But let's get into the match then. So the match was obviously quite good. I thought from a technical stand view, Asuka and Shayna Baszler are great workers. I really liked the work they did. It was great to see them have this match. It was a bit of a dream match for me in terms of it's something different. The ending wasn't particularly great. We got a cheap roll-up for a win, but Asuka getting the windfall here. So you're obviously painting the picture that you're sort of that Asuka and Lana have got a real chance really in this tag team match, but she's your women's champion. Let's not forget that. So she had to stay strong. But I thought they did what they did and the time they had. I quite enjoyed it. What was your thoughts of the match?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect nothing less from those two because out of both of the teams, I think most people would agree that Shayna and Asuka are the really good workers on their respective teams. And I mean, yeah, it's what you said. You do have to be careful booking your women's champion in some sort of tag team feud, because can you afford for her to take certain losses to further the tag team feud and not hurt her picture as the supposedly the top female wrestler on the show? I did think it was interesting, though, what it set up, and that's the fact that, we've seen two people from the team. Now we're going to see the other two people from each team face each other next week. And it looks like, to where Asuka and Shayna was a fair fight, it looks on paper like Nia Jax is going to destroy Lana, which
Yeah,
I will admit, as a fan, that has me intrigued, because I wonder what they're going to do with it. Because is it going to be a straight squash? We haven't seen Lana go through the table in a little bit. And so are they going to go back to that? Or, is Lana going to get some help and actually come out with the win too? I do wonder, like, you have had them beat them in tag matches. You had Asuka beat Shayna. So if you have Lana beat Nia too, how weak does that make your women's tag champions look going into the title match?
definitely. I think you've got some excellent points. I think the danger you've got, obviously, because the women's champions there, that's obviously the problem. I think the problem is, when we look at this feud, it's very one-sided. All we've had, apart from Lana going through tables, is Asuka and Lana. They've already beat them twice, and they've been in non-title matches. When we look at the last meeting of Nia Jax Lana, this is a match that's happened within the last 2 months. Back at the start of November, we had Nia Jax and Lana already. It's a rematch again. I get that you're going into this feud at the pay-per-view as such, and you're building it up, but I just think it would be nice if they sort of mixed with other wrestlers and just had a break kind of. I know that the end goal is this match at the pay-per-view, but I would like to see if they did some sort of matches with some other wrestlers in the meantime. I think doing the same 4 wrestlers against each other in different sort of formats and different sort of formulas, and that makes sense, or different sort of combinations, I think it just gets a bit stale. Did you want to add anything else to that before we go into the next segment?
No, I think we're good. We
No
covered
problem.
most of
Okay.
what went on.
Perfect. Okay, we then go into sort of another segment where we've got the Hurt Business basically walking backstage. There's somebody in their way. Cedric Alexander has to tend to move on, and the Hurt Business are having a laugh. I thought that was a good segment. It shows that the Hurt Business are there for the night, and I just thought it was a really basic segment. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, they're bullies, and they clearly. I think the main focus of the last few weeks has been specifically on Cedric Alexander,
Yeah.
and how Cedric was the one to call out that whatever that random production guy was, and you notice that MVP kind of notices it, like makes a little remark about how Cedric's the one kind of finding his fire and stuff like that, which we're going to see later on in the night with the Hurt Business too.
Yes, we are, definitely. We then went into like a kind of backstage segment where we had Ricochet and Dana Brooke. They were shown talking backstage to Riddle. Riddle obviously comes up with some bro nuts. Riddle asked if they'd seen MVP and Bobby Lashley. They said no. Riddle sort of left, and then it was just a promo, Ricochet and Dana Brooke basically building up the match later. A couple of points for me. I wasn't a fan of this. I think the fact they made Matt Riddle look like he's a joke. He looked like a total jobber. They just didn't have time for him, and these guys are jobbers themselves. So bear in mind, Matt Riddle is going to be challenging for the United States title at the pay-per-view. Yet this guy is not important enough for these jobbers to basically dismiss him almost. But for me, I get they're building the match up, but the fact you're putting your number one contenders for the title before these jobbers, it just didn't work. What was your thoughts of that?
Yeah, over the
That's the way
last
I
few
kind of took
weeks,
it.
I've kind of defended their use of Matt Riddle, because a lot of what you see in his character is his real
Yeah.
personality. But I think what some people have already seen coming, I did see a little bit of this week, and that's the fact that, is Matt Riddle going to be the guy who is just always high backstage like a stoner? And not only that, but he actually annoys other people. And the thing is, this is not the only situation we see that on this week's Raw. It's not just Ricochet and Dana Brooke. We're going to see Matt Riddle pop up throughout the night, and it does seem like he's just kind of obnoxious to everybody. Like, I mean, they don't really have time to talk to him. He's just coming up with these weird hippie ideas and stuff like that. The bro nuts thing, yeah, it does seem a little weird that a guy who in the past has been portrayed as this, yeah, there's references to how much he likes to smoke weed and just kind of have a good time, but does he really have nothing better to do than just sit around like offering people donuts or bro nuts. Like I'm not sure, like MVP made a reference to this on social media. I'm not sure if the whole point of all that was to try to make an offhand reference to the fact that the bro nuts are THC infused or whatever.
Yeah.
Because MVP made a post about how he ate one and then waited and nothing happened. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, they don't want to turn Matt Riddle into this sideshow comedy act. That's for sure.
I think the problem is when you've got him sort of just turning up all the time and they're making him like totally unimportant, like he's almost like nobody cares. He's just an inconvenience. It's a real shame because he's such a talent. But in terms of the sort of promo we had from sort of Ricochet and Dana, I thought it was a good promo. Dana showed the black eye, which clearly builds on. I thought what was clever by WWE in this respect is it's a carry on from last week's match, which was good. I thought it was sensible, and you're given a real reason. Obviously, Reckoning got destroyed last week by Dana Brooke, yet you're given another reason for them to have a rematch, which was clever, I thought. Have you got anything else to add before we go into their match?
No, let's talk about that match.
Okay, no problem. So we had Ricochet and Dana Brooke versus Slapjack and Reckoning. Very quick match. And once again, we get the sort of Retribution guys getting job, basically. We got Dana Brooke get a pinfall over Reckoning again, and Ali obviously destroys them after the match. For me, this clearly shows that unless Mia Yim, aka Reckoning, is going to be getting released from the stable soon, I'm not a fan of this. This is the second week now where she's been getting jobbed. Slapjack, this guy's previously challenged for the United States title, yet you're getting him sort of doing nothing in this match. Ricochet, obviously, he was a spare part as well. The only person that came up with any credit in this match for me was Dana Brooke, really. I just don't get why they're putting Dana Brooke over instead of Ricochet, really, in that respect, getting the pinfall. But for me, it was just a filler. It carried on from last week. And I think we sort of saw this match last week now in terms of Reckoning and Dana Brooke. They've done that now. So I think really they need to do something. And for me, the payoff for Ali, barking orders, that's going to have to come soon. If not, this is going to get stale really quickly. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, they need to figure out what they're going to do with Retribution. Because we have gotten this inconsistent message because, you know, one week it looks like they're going to turn them around and redeem them. And then the very next week, they're not really taken very seriously and they're just kind of struggling to get by. And we did see some of that this week in the sense that Ali looks like he's losing faith in both of them. And Slapjack, he got a win over Ricochet last week. He's obviously not victorious this week. And he's not victorious because of Reckoning. And I can't figure out if they're doing some angle where Mia Yim Reckoning gets her head more in the game because of what Ali's doing, or if this whole thing is just to set up her getting kicked out of the group. And it does bring up some questions. I mean, with this everything going on too, with what happened with another member of Retribution, I don't know what's going on with them and what the long-term plans are, and I'm not sure if they actually know. I do kind of wonder if they're booking Retribution on kind of a week-by-week basis, and they're just thinking, where can we fit them into this show?
I've got 2 points for you. The first one, I'd say, agree with you where they're going to go with this. I could get it, but surely if they were going to follow on, unless it's going to be me and leaving the group, she had to kind of get the revenge this week, other than the black eye. But another thing I would say is, where was T-Bar? Where was Mason this? We know Mason's got some personal issues, which we'll probably go into at the end of the show, supposedly. But I felt that they're meant to be a stable, yet I know you're not getting the GAN element. Let's look at Retribution. Retribution previously have had huge numbers in the whole build-up and when they first debuted and stuff, yet they're able to get pinned here. And all you've got is Ali. There's no sort of comeuppance. There's no sort of, let's get a cheap attack on Dana Brooke or Ricochet, if that makes sense. There's no revenge, which for me, I think it's just buried Retribution forever. I think they're gone beyond the point of saving now. I just don't know. There's nothing you can do with it. I think the sooner they get rid of this group, probably the better. Have you got anything else you want to add?
There was that one part of the match too where I think when Ricochet was on the outside and Ali told him, you should be one of us or something like that. But that was the only time that was brought up. And then the rest of the match, Ali was pretty much just focused on making sure that Reckoning somehow got the win and redeemed herself from the week before. I don't really know exactly what the focus is supposed to be on.
I just think if the payoff is Ricochet joining Retribution, it's not a type of addition that's going to lift the group that further, if that makes sense. It's just another sort of name.
Yeah.
And I just don't get why would he want to join a group that's losing every single week. I know he's got one win this week with obviously Dana Brooke tagging, but it's just a stupid mid-card feud for me. I just don't think it's going anywhere. But let's see what they do next week. I think if we're sort of doing the same match again next week on Raw, I'm not a massive fan of it really.
Oh yeah, that would be massive overkill.
Yeah. But there we go. Okay, moving forward, we then had Sheamus being shown backstage. Keith Lee went up to him and said Sheamus may have stood with Drew McIntyre last week, but it's just a matter of time until he turns his back on Drew. Sheamus said excuse him while I beat the hell out of the champion, and it was obviously just a pretend tease, basically, in that respect. It's nice to see Keith Lee and Sheamus interact. I quite enjoyed it. Didn't really sort of lead to much, but it was fun to see them have that interaction. What was your thoughts?
I like it because they've been doing it for a bit where they're teasing this concept that Sheamus, who has historically been more of a heel than a babyface in WWE, is ultimately going to turn on his best friend, Drew McIntyre. The only issue that I have with it is that as of now, they haven't had McIntyre really acknowledge it. I don't know if they would have McIntyre confront Sheamus and say, like, what's the stuff you're talking to Keith Lee about, about turning on me? Or I thought it would be interesting, too, if McIntyre actually confronts Keith Lee and says, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, basically, if you're going to have Sheamus ultimately turn, I think it would be interesting to have McIntyre confront Keith Lee and actually be in denial about it. And it's a reality that I think a lot of fans expect, but maybe Drew McIntyre, being such a good friend of Sheamus, doesn't want to face that reality. To where, yeah, he's in straight denial that it's going to happen because he thinks that, people have turned on me in the past, but my best friend, someone that I've known way before WWE, he's not going to do that.
Definitely, I agree with you. I think I've got one other kind of thing I'd say to it. I think what would have been nice here is if Sheamus basically attacked Keith Lee. I think Keith Lee's able to get a cheap shot on him there, but yet there's no comeuppance, there's no payback. And I think this is further going towards Sheamus sort of being a babyface, which, do you think they missed the trick there, not having sort of Sheamus getting some sort of comeback on Keith Lee? Because it was almost like he dropped a one line on him. There was no response almost.
It's weird. I think Sheamus said something similar to this last week. It's weird how he Keith Lee says something, and Sheamus's reply is just, "I'm going to go turn on the WWE champion."
Yeah.
And you can think, oh, is he being sarcastic? Is he kind of just mocking what Keith Lee and supposedly other people are saying? Or is he being dead serious? And in the match that they're in, we're about to see him turn on him. You don't really know. I mean, we find out later on, but I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't think it's that bad. It kind of, I don't know what he means by it as a viewer, and I could easily see him turn. I mean, they do this later on, like with this whole spot. Like, it's like, is their friendship falling apart? They're teasing it, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, definitely. We then went into the Miz TV with AJ Styles. So clearly this was obviously designed to build up the main event. Clearly the Miz pointed out that AJ's WWE title match, a TLC, is a TLC match. Styles said this will be the first time he's faced Drew McIntyre in a match, so he's going to hit him with steel chairs and put him through every table he sees. Styles talked about the strengths of McIntyre while adding it won't mean a thing when Drew's knocked out cold. Styles then climbs the ladders to get to the spot at the top of the mountain as WWE champion. And really, really good sort of start to this whole segment. I quite enjoyed it. We then obviously had Sheamus turn up. Sheamus obviously then turned up to sort of, and he said that, saying that they nailed the accents and it was top notch. Sheamus said as entertaining that was, he's sick of people telling him that how he's going to betray his best friend to Drew. Sheamus said that the truth is, if they're in a pub in Dublin, if you heard them talk nonsense like this, it'd kick their heads off and toss them into the gutter where they belong. Morrison pointed out there's three of them in the ring, so Sheamus is outnumbered. Miz kept saying correct, and he asked Morrison some questions. Sheamus said they're not exactly right about that. As a WWE champion, Drew McIntyre walked out with the championship in his kilt. McIntyre and Sheamus got into the ring. McIntyre said he doesn't make threats, he makes promises. McIntyre said that he always overcomes the odds, and it's the same result every time. He yet remains a WWE champion, whether it's Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, or everybody else. And it just basically kind of ended them up on sort of them getting some sort of revenge, really. By the end of it, obviously, Drew tossed the Money in the Bank briefcase all the way up the ring. It was some shot, I'll give him that. That was clearly a sport, as they said in the commentary. But really fun promo. You've got all the main characters. You've obviously got AJ Styles there. You've got Drew. This is going to be your main event at TLC, potentially. And I'm really a big fan of this. And I think it's did a great job. I think you've got everybody there that needs to be on the camera. And you're clearly showing what's going to be your sort of main event of tonight's Raw, if that makes sense. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, there were a few really good elements to this. First of all, right after we see this segment with Sheamus and Keith Lee, I think given the evolution of everything that happened between Sheamus and Drew McIntyre on the show, this segment was kind of crucial because you see Sheamus and Keith Lee arguing about whether or not Sheamus is going to turn on him. So this next segment, you see Drew McIntyre and Sheamus completely on the same page in everything they're going to do. And I think that kind of up and down kind of sets a pretty good flow for what we see later on in the show. The other side of things, you know, AJ Styles, he mentions at one point that it's 4-on-2, which I thought is interesting given that, you know, sometimes Omos is kind of treated like he's almost not there. And the way that AJ kind of stepped out of the ring and left Miz and Morrison to kind of fend for themselves, it set this interesting tone that they've referred to a couple of times. And, you know, even though they're working together right now, AJ Styles is purely there for himself. And it's like, how quickly will he abandon Miz and Morrison if his own interests aren't there? And I think it's important to kind of remind people of that.
Definitely. I think I've got kind of probably one complaint about the segment. You had four of them there. You had Omos, obviously you had Miz Morrison, and you also had AJ, yet they got done over by two, and Omos did nothing. I just think, what is the point of Omos if he's not going to get involved a little bit? He's there. He's obviously a physical presence to make AJ look sort of like a coward, but do you not think they missed a chance here with sort of the numbers game to a certain point?
They could. Yeah,
So,
they could. That's what I thought they were going to do, but it kind of goes back to what I was just saying, that like, at the end of the day, even though they're working together right now, that alliance is temporary. And so they're not four, they're 2-2. And I think that's what they wanted to remind people of, is that AJ and Omos, they don't work for Miz and Morrison at the end of the day. Like, Omos works for AJ and AJ works for himself. And that was the point they wanted to get across. Yeah, when AJ said it's 4-on-2, I thought he and Omos were going to come back in the ring and they were actually going to beat up McIntyre and Sheamus. But they went the other direction and said, you know, we've got two different teams of people who are working together for what they think is a common goal. But at the very end of the day, their goals are actually different. You know, Miz and Morrison, their goal is to make Miz champion, and AJ and Omos, their goal is to make AJ champion. And at what point does that come into conflict? In the segment right there, you see it come into conflict there. You know, AJ was basically saying, you know, I've seen Miz and Morrison get beat down by McIntyre alone. I've seen them get beat down by McIntyre and Sheamus. So I'm not going to sacrifice myself to be part of something like that, because theoretically they're going to easily beat up Miz and Morrison. And then that leaves me by myself. And I'm not putting myself in that scenario right now when I have a guaranteed title shot one-on-one against McIntyre.
I agree with the points. I think he makes some excellent points. I just think the thing with it, I'm a fan of the old school in that respect. That I think what I prefer is when you get the whole sort of heels beating down the babyface, and then by the end of the show, you really want to see the babyfaces getting some sort of revenge, if that makes sense. But they did a different way. Clearly, the finish of the main event, we get to it, it's just the opposite of that to a certain point. But no, let's go into the next segment then. So we had sort of Kofi Kingston and Shelton Benjamin. This was going to be a match. And obviously this followed on from sort of last week's Raw, where we saw Cedric Alexander beat Xavier Woods in a singles match. Clearly we've got the tag team champions there, one half tag team champions, Kofi Kingston, Shelton Benjamin. I thought this was a really, really solid match. I thought they all looked credible. I think both wrestlers are credible. Clearly you can see why Kofi was a world champion not too long ago. And I think what was great about it is you're really starting to build up this whole sort of feud between the sort of Hurt Business and the New Day, ready for TLC. Kofi got the win, but he's selling an injury. What was your thoughts of the first part of match one, really?
I mean, Shelton Benjamin, I've said before, is still quite a good wrestler. I mean, he's aged a little bit, but I mean, like, you know, first of all, anybody who saw him back in like 2005, he was one of the best wrestlers in the world. They just couldn't put all the elements together. But even now, his athletic ability is still very above average on the Raw roster. But having said that, Shelton Benjamin took a hell of a loss. Like, let's just recap exactly how he lost in his match with Kofi. He's on the outside. He almost gets completely counted out. He gets back in the ring at 9. As he gets back in the ring, he's instantly hit with Trouble in Paradise and pinned. I mean, that's a hell of a loss to take.
It is a big loss when you're going into sort of, they're going to be challenging for the tag team champions. I think it's a shame, but then when you look at what came next, clearly they are building, there is a longer end game here at a certain point, but let's look at this. These guys, Alexander and Benjamin, they've already got a tag team victory over the World Tag Team Champions back on the 23rd of November. They got like a quick victory, if that makes sense. And then obviously we then go forward with this. What happened next on this segment was it then leads to basically Cedric getting kind of angry. Cedric goes, I challenge Kingston to a match. And then they then had another match. In this match, Cedric Alexander got the win for another great victory with a lumbar check. Once again, Cedric does what Shelton can't. And it's getting to the point now with this where Cedric Alexander's getting almost too big for the Hurt Business. And I think that's becoming quite apparent to me when watching it. And I think we're looking at this first half of it, when you got Kofi winning, I was like, oh, great. You shouldn't really be bearing your contenders to the tag team titles. But when you get Cedric Alexander getting some revenge, particularly who is the one he pins as well, he pins Kofi. Kofi's the next world champion. That's going to further credit Cedric. What were your thoughts of the second part of the match, or match two, shall we say?
So did you watch Raw Talk?
I didn't see Raw Talk this week.
So you're actually echoing a lot. They had Shelton Benjamin and Cedric Alexander on there, and you're echoing a lot of what they're saying. First of all, Shelton Benjamin, I thought I was interested to watch Raw Talk to hear him explain this. Shelton Benjamin, they asked him about his loss to Kofi. You know, no matter what Cedric did later, Shelton lost flat out. And Shelton Benjamin said something interesting. He said, you know, it's not about what one of us does in matches. It's about what we do as a group. And you know, Kofi got hurt in the match with Shelton Benjamin, and Shelton said, what are we called? We're called the what business? You know, he got hurt. He is the Hurt Business. And it's interesting to see them working together, and the fact that they're not really, compared to what we were just saying about AJ Styles and Miz and Morrison, Shelton wasn't focused on his own loss. He was focused on the fact that someone else in his group and his family got the win. And the other very interesting part, Cedric Alexander was gloating about the fact on Raw Talk that he pinned a former WWE champion. You know, we said a few weeks ago, and I definitely said this, that the point of the Hurt Business, the focus was Bobby Lashley, and the group as a whole were kind of together to help get Lashley more over. But over the past couple of weeks, the poster child of the Hurt Business has kind of become Cedric Alexander, and I find that very interesting because you have a very different path you can go with Alexander than we're talking about with Lashley. And it is interesting to see them building up two of their guys.
Definitely. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether what the fallout is of Cedric Alexander becoming too big for the Hurt Business to a certain point. I've only got one kind of small complaint with this. I think when we look at this match, this is another incarnation where we've seen Rematch City. So we saw this match back on the 2nd of November, 16th of November we saw it. We also saw it back on the 23rd of November. And we're also seeing these guys face like last week as well. Do you not think it's too much of the same wrestlers against each other again and again? It's almost like exactly the same as what's going on. It seems to be repeat week after week, even though it's a singles match, not a tag match this time.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, it is the same people involved, but I don't have as much of a gripe with it if what they're doing with those same people is a little different. And I think we even said this when I was messaging you about it this week. I thought we saw some interesting progression of some angles on Raw. Is probably why I enjoyed it. And this one's particular because we have seen them face each other before, the New Day and the Hurt Business. But to my knowledge, we have not seen Cedric Alexander pin Kofi Kingston, which I think is the biggest extreme you can go because you have...
It's definitely
because Cedric's the guy who probably, in terms of their entire WWE career, Cedric's the guy who's accomplished the least in the Hurt Business. Kofi's the guy in the New Day who's accomplished the most. So you have the least pin the most, and that's a definitive statement.
I think if we go full circle, let's look at it. Cedric Alexander, probably 2 or 3 months ago, was getting killed every single week by the Hurt Business, jobbing every week. To go from that to pin an ex-world champion, it's a massive win. But for me, the payoff really at TLC, we have to get new tag team champions. I think if they don't pay this off in this feud with the new tag team champions, I'm going to be a bit annoyed, really. I think you've done such a good job, really, of having this match again and again. This is finding the time for new tag team champions. Would you be a fan of them changing the belts at TLC?
I would. I'm totally cool with them doing that. And to what you were just saying, you know, and to the point of what Shelton Benjamin was saying on Raw Talk about how the focus is not on them as individuals, but on the group. If they do lose to the New Day, not only what does it say about Cedric and Shelton, but what does it say about the legitimacy of the Hurt Business? You know, if they've set all this up, the only other thing I could see, you know, if they do lose, it could be to set up somehow they lose because of dissension or Cedric's head getting too big for himself. And it's setting up an angle to where Cedric is unceremoniously kicked out of the Hurt Business because he's gotten too focused on himself. That's the only other way I could see them going.
I think that could be a fun bit if they do go on to that. What I'd like to see, I think MVP, I'd really like to see from MVP him getting a bit more, trying to break them up a bit, trying to sort of get sort of Cedric's head straight and Shelton's sort of head straight and get them together. Really, I think that's something that they didn't give them a chance this week. Which I think if the same thing happens next week, I think he's going to be a great addition to that particular element of the storyline. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, there's been comparisons between the Hurt Business and the Nation of Domination since the day the Hurt Business was formed. But I think you and I have even said flat out on the air that in the past, Bobby Lashley has kind of been the Rock of the Hurt Business, and the Farouk has been MVP. But over the past couple of weeks, the Rock has been Cedric Alexander. And the same way that the Rock got too big for Nation of Domination, is Cedric going to be the one who kind of becomes that with the Hurt Business?
I love that 98 connotation. I love that sort of comparison. That's an excellent comparison. I really agree with you. I think spot on. I think the interesting thing with it is why you've got Lashley winning every single week still pretty much. I think if you didn't have Lashley there, I think definitely Cedric could be the main man in the Hurt Business based on this past week's booking and stuff. But let's see where they go. I think that, as I said, they put a lot of effort and time into these sort of 4 wrestlers facing each other over the past month or 2 months, as such as we said. So let's see what they do. I think clearly at TLC, this is going to be a fun match either way. In ring, it's going to be really good.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, we then went on to sort of our main event. We had Drew McIntyre. Sorry, it wasn't even the main event. Sorry, I've jumped ahead a bit. No, we've got Drew McIntyre and Sheamus versus The Miz, John Morrison, and AJ Styles of Almas. This was a pretty good match. They got quite a long time. They got 16 minutes here, and it ended up with Sheamus basically accidentally hitting Drew, and then Styles getting the pinfall. For me, really, really good tag match. Love the whole element of AJ Styles being a coward, not wanting to get involved. Sensible from a challenger. And I think what was really, really good is you've got AJ Styles getting the pinfall here. You're not pinning Drew. He's your champion. You want to protect him. AJ Styles getting the pinfall. He's the contender. You want to make him look good. A massive fan of this. I really kind of enjoyed it. I thought it was a great match. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, and going back to what I was saying before, I'll bring it up again. The flow of this tension or lack of tension between Sheamus and McIntyre, what we see at the end of this match is that down again. So we had an up before in the segment where Sheamus and McIntyre work solidly against Miz and Morrison, beat them up, AJ and almost run off. Now we're going back down. They kind of fall apart. It's like, they're not on the same page. We thought they were before, but in this tag match, they're not. And they lose because of that. And that leads to this segment we have afterward, which I will go ahead and say I thought was very well done. Yeah, by the way, the match was good. I think that when it comes to Miz, Morrison, and AJ, they've each played their part well. We did see some pretty good athleticism from John Morrison, which, given that Miz is Money in the Bank and AJ is the #1 contender, Morrison, someone in that position could easily get lost in it. But John Morrison is so athletic, and dare I say, some people might hate me for this, he's just as athletic, if not more, than AJ Styles. He can still shine because he can do things that those other 2 guys can't do, to where even though he's not the one in line for a title shot, he's still the guy that you're kind of watching in the match itself.
Yeah, no, I think spot on. I think John Morrison, clearly he's a great sort of third wheel to a certain point. I think clearly he's got much more talent than Miz. He's a great addition. He's not lost anything from his time on Lucha Underground and Impact Wrestling to now going back on WWE. I think he's a great third part, and I think he had something else. But I thought it was a fun segment. We then go backstage. We've got Lana talking to Asuka. She said next week she's got to face Nia Jax. She can't do it. She was basically crying the whole segment. For me, I thought it was pathetic. What they've sort of missed here in that respect was Asuka and Lana beat Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler last 2 weeks running, and clearly Lana won sort of Survivor Series, which means she's got a certain amount of credibility from that to a certain point. She shouldn't be crying about facing Nia Jax, really. For me, not looking forward to this match next week. I felt it was a stupid segment. It was a bit amateurish to a certain point. What were your thoughts?
Wait, so you just said Lana won Survivor Series, but the very big asterisk there is how did Lana win?
She still won Survivor Series, though. She still won. She
did, but she didn't do anything.
No.
It makes sense to me why Lana would still be terrified of Nia Jax, because even though they've been pushing Lana to an extent and she's been getting some lucky wins in the tag matches, there's nothing to suggest that Lana, where she's at right now in her in-ring career, could actually do anything noteworthy to Nia Jax in a one-on-one match. I want to focus on something else. I understand Lana being terrified. What I don't really understand is Asuka just openly saying, "Oh yeah, you can do it. Like, yeah, you got this. You can do it." Why would Asuka be saying that? Like, given what we've seen with Lana, Nia Jax has just easily grabbed her and thrown her through a table, and there's nothing Lana's been able to do about it. That's those two by themselves. So I do wonder what Asuka's the one who kind of seemed off in that segment to me, because what the hell is she talking about? Like there's no reason to think that Lana's got this match.
I think the thing is, obviously, it just shows she doesn't look at Lana as a threat for that women's title down the line. That's what I think. That's why I kind of look at it, and I think it was a segment to build up next week's match, which it was okay. I think next week we are going to get Lana get the win somehow, which I just think is absolutely stupid. I'm not going to be a fan of that. I think the table element's kind of gone now to a certain point, but yeah, I'm just kind of bored of it. I think the Lana push, I'm just done with it now. I think we need to get this tag team match done at TLC, and then we need to get Asuka back as a singles wrestler, because that's, as you said earlier in the show, let's not forget this is your women's champion here. While she's on this whole day out shopping with Lana and doing whatever else, she's kind of not defending that women's tag team belt, which she's stuck in this match, which is it's filler for your women's tag team champion. If you look at SmackDown, we've got Sasha Banks defending the belt practically every single week now, whereas on Raw we've got Asuka babysitting Lana, which the problem, what they need to do really is get this feud done. The whole feel good factors obviously needs to happen. Probably that's what they want to do. But moving forward, I just want this match to be over next week already. Anything you want to add to this before we move forward?
No, we'll see what they do with it. Yeah, I mean, if Lana does beat Nia, it's like 4 consecutive wins in a row for Asuka and Lana.
It's Lana and Nia 1-on-1. So
right.
It'll be 1-on-1, and it'll be as you said, it'll be probably the 3rd or 4th win on the trot going into a pay-per-view. It's how they do it. If it's a cheap win and she somehow gets the win by fluke or a disqualification, fine. But what I have noticed from this feud is Nia Jax and Nia Jax and also Shayna Baszler have not had any momentum at all other than putting Lana through tables, which it's just a weird way to book your tag team champions. Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, the champions aren't looking strong. Your singles women's champion is not looking occupied in any way. She's looking like she's just got a bunch of free time. It does bring up some questions about what you're going to do with your champions long term, all of them.
Yeah, no problem. Let's go to the next segment. So we had Sheamus backstage with Charlie Caruso. Charlie says the obvious thing to Sheamus: "You've just been hit with you've just hit a bro kick on your best friend Drew McIntyre." She asked if it was intentional. Sheamus said no, it wasn't intentional. McIntyre walked up to Sheamus, so Charlie conveniently left. Sheamus told him it wasn't intentional. Drew stared at Sheamus. He knew exactly what's going to happen. They then chose to go to a break. For me, stupid time to go to a break. What the planning of that is just absolutely ridiculous. But obviously, we come back off the break. We then have a massive brawl, and it's obviously Drew McIntyre and Sheamus taking lumps out of each other. They're surrounded by wrestlers. Drew Gulak is there. He's, for some reason, he's recording on his phone, which was a bit unusual. It ends up with them just sort of brawling. Eventually, we get Pat Buck, WWE official, sort of trying to break it up. They end up doing it like a double team powerbomb through him. And then McIntyre and Sheamus at the end of it say pint. A couple of things for me. That's a WWE official. They've attacked, so surely they should be suspended. Braun suspended supposedly for attacking what's his name? The other one that's not been on the show.
Adam Pearce
as well. And for me, I think the way that they made up best friends, it's just a total needless segment. I don't think they should have had any real contact for me. I think they should have carried on that mystery of whether Sheamus and Drew are going to be friends again. I think you've done that sort of the comeuppance and then the best friends again. It was too much in too quick time for me. What were your thoughts of the segment and what do you take from it?
All right. So now we found the part of the show. I was wondering when this was going to happen. All right. So I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I like the way they did it. I liked from a I guess because I've shot movies and I've shot shows before, from a cinematic point of view, I actually liked the setup because you see them arguing and every fan watching saying, all right, this is it. Like, they're going to break apart and they're going to start fighting, and they cut to a commercial break. And so you don't even see what starts the fight. And for me, that's a little intriguing. Do you see Mad Max Fury Road?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, all right. So, I mean, there is a scene in there where something very violent happens, but all you see is Tom Hardy's character walk off screen. You hear a few noises, then he comes back covered in blood. And so some people who've watched the movie have said, like, it's the fact that you don't see what happens that somehow makes it more dramatic. And I think that could be said for this segment. You don't see how the fight started. You see them staring each other down. You know they're about to come to blows. And when you come back from the break, they're in the middle of a brawl. And I didn't think it was that creatively bad. The Pat Buck thing, I think Nia Jax has proven that, yeah, if you assault Adam Pearce, you get suspended. But Nia Jax assaulted Pat Buck, and all she got was a fine, I'm pretty sure. So I think McIntyre and Sheamus, they got some kind of fine. But what this segment did to me, so like everyone watching assumed, all right, they're going to have them split up. They're fighting each other, and that's it. Their friendship's over. And even though he's got this AJ Styles thing, McIntyre's going to start feuding with Sheamus. And then Pat Buck comes in. They put him through a table, and they're friends again, which is a very Irish thing to do. As a Irish descendant, I kind of know a little thing about that. And so it brings up the intriguing part to me is that, well, can they ever split up? Can Sheamus ever turn on him? Because if they do start fighting, they make up again 5 minutes later. So maybe he's not going to turn on him, because it's hard to turn on someone who you can fight 1 second and still be best mates with in the next, you know?
I agree. I think you made some interesting counter arguments. I'd say I'd agree with that. I think you made some interesting points. What I would say is, where's the end game with this? Where's this kind of going? Are we going to get a match at Royal Rumble between Sheamus and Drew eventually? I just think the fact that I would be much more a fan of when Sheamus and Drew accidentally kind of end up injuring each other and ended up sort of costing each other matches and stuff. I'd be kind of a fan. The problem is you are protecting Drew so much at the moment that you can't really do anything in that element of the storyline to a certain point. But it's fun, I guess. Obviously, if they want to keep the mystery going of when Sheamus is going to turn, it was the right thing to do. And for me, I just couldn't believe how quick they were friends again. But that's only a small criticism, really. Is there anything else you want to add before we go on to the next segment?
I mean, I think the point of the segment was that they're friends again very quickly, and that's what makes their relationship different than other people on the roster, where, you know, some people on the roster, they start fighting, and that's it. You know, they're broken up, whereas they're the time friends. I guess you kind of have to understand, like, Scottish and Irish, like, culture and the whole culture of pub fights, to where when you go to, like, an Irish pub, the stereotype is that all the people there, you know, and you consider friends, you consider almost family, and you all get into fights with each other. And then at the end, when everybody's beat each other up, you're still family.
I've got one thing for you, Josh. Sorry to interrupt you. I've got one counter argument. One other point I'd like to say. Let's not forget, Sheamus should want the world title as well. He was a callous heel for many, many years. Yet that whole element of him wanting the world title has gone out the window, really. I think surely his motive should be getting that world title at any cost, really. I think the fact that he can play along with Drew and have drinks and everything else, but at the back of his mind, surely he should want that world title. I think clearly when he does turn heel, which I would hope he would do soon, the world title's got to be prevalent at the end of this, really.
I mean, the
he
message
was a heel before, now he's a babyface.
Right. The message they've tried to kind of send across, though, is that, you know, well, McIntyre was a heel for most of his comeback to WWE and stuff, too. He was the Scottish psychopath and all that. The message they've sent for both guys kind of is that no matter what they've done and no matter what kind of people they've been to other guys on the roster, their friendship is so deep that it kind of transcends all of that. It even... You know, there was a time when Sheamus was still wrestling as a heel. He was playing a heel on Team Raw for Survivor Series, but he's still friends with Drew McIntyre. And so I guess the question becomes, how deep does their friendship go? How much of their own, you know, nature when it comes to how they inherently are on the rest of the show, they're willing to forego for the sake of this brotherhood, this friendship that they have. Now, you know, I will say, I think the point of Sheamus right now, I can't believe they haven't even mentioned this flat out yet. Sheamus doesn't have any set plans for TLC right now. You've got Omos on the outside with AJ Styles in this TLC match. Is Sheamus going to come out and help McIntyre to kind of even up the odds?
Yeah, good point.
And you have a lot of creative liberty you can do with that, you know, because if you want to turn them, you can have this be the moment when Sheamus does. There's a great spot you can do with him shoving Drew off the ladder. Or do you keep the friendship intact? And it's actually Sheamus who comes out and equalizes Omos.
I think the trouble you've got is because Drew's so protected in terms of not losing matches, they can't even tease the whole thing of AJ Styles sort of Sheamus costing Drew the belt. That they can't do that at all, which is a shame. But it's a slow build turn. I'm interested to see what they do. For me, I think the Royal Rumble is where we're going to get Drew and Sheamus. I think that seems to be pretty obvious. Would you be a fan of that at the Rumble?
Sure. I could do it. Yeah.
Definitely. We then go sort of backstage. We have Jeff Hardy shown backstage getting ready for his match. Riddle walked up to him and with a box of Bro-Nuts. Riddle suggested they become like the Hardy Boys, but Jeff told him he had to go. Riddle said that his finisher could be the Bro Tree in motion. Jeff said he kind of liked it, but he had to go for the match. Riddle ate one of the donuts. Clearly, obviously, this is a backstage segment to build up the Lashley versus Riddle match at the pay-per-view, and also the Hardy-Lashley match. What was your thoughts of this segment?
I like the name the Hardy Bros.
Yeah.
I like the name Broetry in Motion, but it's more of what we were talking about with Ricochet and Dana Brooke before. It's like Matt Riddle's this guy who's so high that his timing's not good, and it's like Jeff Hardy doesn't really have time to talk to him because it's in the middle of the match. It makes Matt Riddle look kind of stupid. It makes Matt Riddle look very unimportant. The segment itself, now, I will tell you, in the match that we're about to see, that gets fixed a little bit to a degree.
Fair point. We'll go into the match then. So we have Bobby Lashley and Jeff Hardy. Fun match. Interesting to see the mixture of styles. And I thought the time they did, they got a good amount of momentum. Lashley obviously getting the windfall there. Clearly, obviously, we had Riddle sort of come out after and try and help sort of Jeff Hardy, try and sort of break up the lock. And I really like the way that they're feuding this Bobby Lashley-Riddle match. For me, I think the only thing that's missing from Matt Riddle really is he should have some anger really towards Lashley. Lashley last week put him in the Lashley lock, the hurt lock, and then sort of there's no real comeuppance, which I felt was kind of missing really. I think here he showed sort of a softer side to a certain point. Well, what were your thoughts of this match and what happened after?
Yeah. I mean, Jeff Hardy, I don't really know what they're going to do with him. It looks like they actually are trying to bring him out of this never-ending feud with Elias. And Bobby Lashley, it goes back to the tag match we were talking about earlier. Not the tag match, but like the tag team feud with the Hurt Business and the New Day. It's interesting that there's a completely different segment on the show where they're keeping Bobby Lashley looking strong too. I can't really tell what exactly they're doing to this because it's almost like they were setting up a match between this newly formed Hardy Bros and Bobby Lashley and I assume MVP. So you have the Hurt Business involved in two different tag team feuds. I know the point is to keep Matt Riddle in the U.S. title picture. Jeff Hardy, I don't know, do you have Matt Riddle lose to Lashley, then Hardy and Riddle wind up teaming together? I don't know. We'll have to see what they're doing with this. I don't actually know.
Well, I've got to say, I don't think WWE have done a very good job this month of building up Riddle ready for this contendership, number one contendership against Lashley. Lashley is in a machine. He's unstoppable. He hasn't lost a match in God knows how long, and he's on one of the biggest winning streaks in WWE. So I feel sorry for Riddle. Riddle's almost going to be like sort of just a temporary challenger, really, I would believe. But I'm hoping next week we get Riddle get a win. Riddle needs to get a big win for me to further cement why he's got this number one contendership match. What do you reckon? Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, because, I mean, Riddle looked like a joke right now, so he needs something serious.
One last funny thing I have to say, at the end of, obviously, the segment in the match, obviously, MVP grabbed some of the donuts, and I thought it was just funny. The way he grabbed one, took one bite, I thought, what the hell am I eating? And chucked it down like he was eating a piece of poo or something. I thought it was a comedic from MVP, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, that's MVP. Like, I know that whole spot was all him just coming up with that on the fly.
I've got kind of one last thing I'd say about the segment as well. Do you think, like, clearly with Retribution, Hurt Business now, WWE don't seem to have this whole mentality of numerous numbers against, like, a few people? They didn't seem to want to have the whole stable element. Obviously, great stables such as the NWO, D-Generation X, the Ministry. There was always huge numbers beating down sort of other people, whereas they seem to have, the whole element stable seems to have been lost a bit this week's Raw for me, both with Retribution and also with the Hurt Business. What do you reckon? Why do you reckon they're not doing that?
That's a fair point. I mean, yeah, it's sort of what I just said. We are kind of seeing the Hurt Business split off into two different tag teams almost, even though I think MVP was out there with Cedric and Shelton. You kind of see, and then, Retribution was just three people this week too. It does kind of make you wonder where were the other guys, and if they are a full group, why do they not have each other's backs?
If I was booking Raw this week, this is a prediction now. I think what you need to do Bobby Lashley and Cedric Alexander and Shelton Benjamin, and you need them to face Matt Riddle and also the New Day. I think you need to do that six-man tag this week on Raw, 100%.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen. Yeah.
It'll be fun. It'll be a fun match.
Yeah, I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense because you have a stable in one, and you get the other three guys are involved in feuds with those people in that stable, so that seems pretty logical to me.
Definitely. We then went sort of backstage. We had Randy Orton shown in his locker room. There's a knock on the door, and it's Ramblin' Rabbit. telling Randy Orton that Bray Wyatt can't wait to see him, Orton looked at him like, "What the hell have I got into? What the hell am I doing in this stable in this sort of segment?" But for me, funny segment. I would much rather see Randy Orton slam the door on the puppet to a certain point. I'm
Yeah,
just surprised how
yeah.
Randy Orton, there was no sort of retaliation really. And what I would question is, what do you make of this whole puppets outside the funhouse? They've never ever really paid that off yet, which I think that's another thing that they should do eventually.
I mean, I don't know what they're doing with the whole thing. I mean, but like, I think in the case of Rambling Rabbit, yeah, I was absolutely expecting Randy Orton to, you said slam him in the door. I thought he was just kind of pull him out from behind the door and like stomp on him or whatever. To because the whole lead up to Raw was that Orton was going to go to the Firefly Funhouse, and we saw instead he's bringing Funhouse Bray to Raw, bringing him into the ring in a match. But it would be interesting to see a little taste of Orton destroying the Funhouse by killing a character who pretty much is killed every week on the Funhouse anyway.
It's Kenny from South Park, as we said
from
previously.
South Park, exactly. So I mean, he gets killed all the time. So like, why not have Orton be the one to kill him this week?
Definitely. We then went into this kind of main event. So obviously, Randy Orton versus Funhouse Bray Wyatt. This was an okay match. They kind of got 12 minutes, which was a lot longer than I thought. And clearly what it ended up being is Orton kind of thought he was going to get the pinfall. We then obviously have sort of the lights go off and then it's the Fiend. Bray Wyatt turns into the Fiend. Fun match. Interesting to see the role reversal from last week's Raw. I like the way they switched Wyatt to Fiend. It was really, really fun. But as I said at the start of the show, for me, they really, really struggled to do anything without Alexa Bliss. I think the whole thing, they needed Alexa Bliss this week to either take an RKO or follow up last week's momentum, which they kind of missed. And what they have clearly done on this week's Raw is they are painting Bray Wyatt as a massive babyface now, which if we look at the lineage and the history of the storyline, Bray Wyatt converted Alexa Bliss from a babyface and then she turned on a friend, and she's meant to be heelish, yet Bray Wyatt's also like a babyface now. It just doesn't really work for me. What were your thoughts on the match and kind of what they've done so far?
So the match, there was a lot of talk online about did they give away one of the TLC main events for free? And some people said, well, no, because Bray Wyatt and The Fiend are two different personas. So a match between Funhouse Bray Wyatt and Randy Orton is very different than a match between The Fiend and Randy Orton. But I felt kind of like we did get that match because Bray Wyatt did most of the same moves that The Fiend does. One thing I do disagree with, though, some people said, oh, it's ridiculous how they're treating it like they're two different people because you have Orton hitting the RKO on Bray Wyatt and then The Fiend comes back and suddenly The Fiend's fine. They made it look like a totally different person took Bray Wyatt's place. There's no way Bray Wyatt could have gotten into his Fiend gear that fast. So it takes things to. And I'm like, think about the history of WWE and wrestling. So we saw Mick Foley as three different people in one Royal Rumble. Remember the Corporate Kane stuff? We saw a spot where Corporate Kane gets his leg shattered and he's put into an ambulance. And within seconds, the ambulance doors open and out comes the masked Kane and he's completely fine. So this thing with Bray Wyatt turning into the Fiend like that's not like some new thing that WWE's never done before. And I mean, yeah, is it supernatural? Is it apart from reality? Yeah. Is the Fiend, everything about him is disconnected from reality? Yeah. It didn't seem too far-fetched to me, basically. What else were we talking about? About Bray Wyatt being a babyface.
The babyface transition of Bray Wyatt, when we look at it, he's not really done anything. He's sort of, all he's done is converted Alexa Bliss, and what she did, the conversion was a hillish move. I think the thing with it that I would say is, if I'm looking at this was a clever finish and clever end of the show. So it's 1-1 between Randy Orton and The Fiend now, if that makes sense. So Randy got a one-up machine last week. The Fiend got a one-up machine this week. Right. For me, I'm not a fan of giving away a pay-per-view match on TV. I think they didn't do enough, really. It went far too long. The amount of time they got to do anything was too long for me. And I think I'm interested in what they do next. I think next week they need to do something. And the problem is, I think they've put themselves into a corner, WWE, with this match at TLC, because Randy Orton's obviously the only man really to beat Drew McIntyre this year. I'm not wrong with that, I don't think. And yet you're going to probably have him potentially lose here to The Fiend. And if Fiend loses, there's maybe no recovery, because Fiend obviously doesn't lose to anybody apart from Goldberg. Do you think WWE are really stupid doing this Fiend versus Orton match so soon?
I don't know. It depends on what they're going to do in it, because
there's no stipulation to protect him. It's not like it's going to be. I don't think it's a TLC match. It should be really a weapons match or some sort of match where if you are going to have sort of last man standing, I'll never forget a match years ago with Chris Jericho and Kane. They didn't want Kane to be pinned, so they had Kane be buried by loads of different barrels to try and make him. That was the only way to keep him down. They need to do something similar if they're going to have the Fiend lose at TLC.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised to my knowledge, they haven't announced a single like tables match or a ladder match. It's all been that there's been announced a couple of TLC matches and that's it. I think it needs something like the Fiend in a regular wrestling match doesn't really make sense because a guy who defies the laws of physics, like why would he suddenly engage in a technical wrestling match? See, that's what I think is good about Funhouse Bray Wyatt is he's happy to just wrestle a match because, and the thing is I did think the match on Raw is pretty funny how you have him in like submission holds and he's kind of smiling and stuff like that because he's still having a good time. Like he's so delusional. Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do with The Fiend and Randy Orton. Yeah, as far as whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, it depends on how they execute it. Also, for the Go Home Raw we're going to see this Monday or tomorrow, actually, my only question is Punky Brewster done filming?
Yeah, I think it must be. I don't think they'll let Alexa go for right before a pay-per-view. Do you think one last element I would say before we give the score, a rating of the show, a score as such? Do you think we're finally going to get any sort of payoff? Let's look at the history. Randy Orton burnt down the compound event and supposedly killed Sister Abigail in the storyline. Supposedly, do you think they're ever going to sort of do some follow on with Sister Abigail? Because I thought this would have been the feud really where you're going to go for the whole mystique and all that. Like I thought you'd pay that off really with some sort of cameo or some sort of histrionic thing to Sister Abigail in some respect, really.
I don't know because they have teased her coming on for about 7 years now.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do it now. There's not enough time.
I don't know. I mean, we've seen everything from her coming on as her own character to at one point she was pretty much Bray Wyatt in drag.
Yeah, I remember that.
To where I don't know. I mean, there was talk when Alexa Bliss first appeared in that Funhouse match or the Swamp match or whatever with Braun Strowman that Alexa Bliss was assuming the role of Sister Abigail. Yeah, I think at this point the closest thing to Sister Abigail we're going to get in terms of like a female who fights alongside Bray Wyatt is the Alexa Bliss character. Now, I mean, at some point, could you say that she's been possessed by the spirit of Sister Abigail? Sure. Do I think that Alexa Bliss necessarily needs that mention? No. I think that the fact that we've seen the Fiend corrupt people and change them in the past, I think that's pretty sufficient.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm going to go into kind of a score, my final thoughts of Raw. If I was going to give this week's score, I'm going to go probably for 6 out of 10. I would say Raw wasn't a terrible show, but it was kind of boring for me in a lot of parts. I think they hadn't really done anything that different. There was nothing really sort of where I was like, wow, I have to talk about it really, which I think they're just sort of going along the road slowly up to TLC. But it was okay. It wasn't anything special really. What's your score of Raw and your final thoughts?
It's funny because I enjoyed it more, but I was actually going to go with a score a little lower, but I didn't mean it in a bad way. I was going to go with a 5 out of 10 because I thought you were going to give it like a 2 or a 3.
No, I'm not. It's not that bad. There was some good stuff.
So, I mean, like there were some good matches and some matches got some good time, but I will say it wasn't necessarily the best show from a wrestling match quality. Because besides the couple of matches that got some decent time, there weren't necessarily great in-ring matches. I mean, even like Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler, who are capable of, Shayna Baszler and Asuka, who are capable of putting on a great match. They didn't do that, on Raw. But I thought enough of the angles had some progress. I mean, I know we talked about some that were kind of stagnant and stale, but I thought enough of them moved on to where it felt like there was some forward motion in the show and in the overall feuds. And that's what I thought was the upside. The stuff with Sheamus and Drew McIntyre, seeing Cedric Alexander kind of continue to push himself to the top of the Hurt Business. There was enough of that to where I enjoyed it. And the thing is, I think one thing that's important to mention to everybody watching this is that I do watch some of WWE stuff on a little bit of a delay. So I had heard everything about how terrible this Raw was. I heard one guy online saying the 3-hour show felt like 6 hours watching it because it just dragged on for so long. So I was dreading watching this, and I get to my house and I put it on, and like I find it kind of flowing by, and I do enjoy most of the stuff, and I keep watching, and suddenly the 3 hours are up. 3 hours felt at most like just 3 hours, like if not a little faster.
Well said. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's great to hear a kind of a different opinion of it. I think the only thing I think for me that's missing really is there's not that sense of intrigue. They didn't really plant any cliffhanger for next week. Really, it just ends. There's no sort of, you're not sort of paying something off. Whereas when we go into NXT in a second, NXT pretty much every week are planting something. You have to see the next chapter to a certain point of stuff. Which with Raw, it's just match after match. Really, I think when all you've got to look forward to next week is Nia Jax and Lana, it's not much of a sell for a go home show to a pay per view. Bear in mind, on tomorrow night's Raw, we are going to be in a new location. Not that was mentioned at all throughout this whole week's Raw.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you got anything else to add before we hit this week's NXT?
No, I mean, it is interesting that the only thing they're promoting is Nia Jax and Lana. I assume, now normally when it comes to Raw and SmackDown, I assume tomorrow morning they will have some news on like the WWE app or WWE.com saying certain things are going to have. There will be a little more of a promotion, but yeah, you know, they don't do a very good job actually on selling the next week's Raw on the week before. That's something AEW does a great job at, by the way. AEW completely sets up the next Dynamite toward the end of their show the week prior. But yeah, WWE has a history of kind of promoting the show the day of. And honestly, I think that's partially because of how many rewrites they do.
Yeah,
I know there was
point.
a point in time. I know there was a point in time when the creative team met on the weekend before, and it might not be a case of where they just, you know, it might be a case where they don't know what they're going to do until the Monday morning when they kind of get together, and that's when they start setting some plans in stone, and they can go on WWE.com and say, this is what's happening tonight.
Yeah, perfect. I agree with you. I think you make some great points. So let's hit this NXT show. So obviously this NXT show is coming off the fantastic War Games. Just before we go into the show, just a quick mention. What was your thoughts of the War Games before I go into the NXT?
I thought it was a great show. Especially, I mean, you told me this before I even watched it. The women's War Games match was good. I mean, the only thing I would have done differently on that show is I would have flipped where both of those War Games matches were.
Yeah,
because
100%.
honestly, what the women did at the beginning of the show, I felt especially bad for Tommaso Ciampa and Timothy Thatcher having to follow it, but no one could really follow it. I mean, even the men in their match, the men's match had a very different pace, and it was a little slower. I thought it wouldn't have been bad as an opener when there's nothing else in the show to compare it to. But the women, that would have been a great closer. I think too, even though it doesn't really matter in WWE, I think too, if you had switched the matches, you would have had a dynamic where the baby faces win at the beginning and the main event you see the heels win. Whereas like they wanted to kind of close the show with the baby face Undisputed Era being the victors. I guess that's the argument they would make. But the women's match was far superior, not just to the other War Games match, but I mean, it was kind of far superior to any match that we've seen like that in a long time.
For me personally, it was my match of the year. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I know it was high risk and there was a lot of certain injuries coming out of the show, but they did everything. I think the Io Shirai spot where she jumped off the cage with a bin, absolutely crazy. I think everybody sort of put their body on the line. And what I really loved about it is they did a fantastic job in the build up to that match as well. I think it was going into the pay-per-view, you're generally excited because NXT and WWE have actually put an effort in. They've actually built up the match lovely, which is, I love it. Nothing better than seeing a feud where decent groundwork's gone in and you really don't know who's going to win. Rather than go into a pay-per-view, we know who's going to win probably. But no, let's get into it then. So NXT this past week, we had the returning Finn Balor. Balor starts out saying the War Games is done. It's time for team sports to be over. Captains, factions and bragging rights don't interest Balor. He says it's Wednesday and the champion's back. Balor says some people love him, some people hate him. But if you want to get to know Balor better, you better come to the ring. He issues an open challenge. He's then interrupted by Pete Dunne. We then get a sort of another interruption from Kyle O'Reilly. We then get Damian Priest come out. And then obviously have them sort of bickering and sort of exchanging sort of challenges to each other. And right at the end, we kind of get the music of Karrion Kross. Scarlett comes out and approaches Balor. And obviously we then sort of get, where's this going? What was your thoughts of this opening promo?
So I thought that, they were setting up who's going to be the next challenger for Finn Balor, and that the way that we see all these different people come out, they were setting up a fatal four-way with Pete Dunne, Kyle O'Reilly, Damian Priest, and the returning Karrion Kross. As we see later on in the show, it looks like that's not actually the point. But to the point of like who they're bringing out, yeah, I mean, you bring out two of the highlight reels. I mentioned when Kyle O'Reilly got the winning pinfall for his team in the War Games match, I was like, they must have a push in mind for O'Reilly. And then Pete Dunne, you could say that, he's probably the best wrestler on Kings of NXT, Team McAfee, whatever. Damian Priest was not victorious in the North American match, so what's he doing out there? Karrion Kross was the NXT champion, only gave the title up for injury. Him being back out there in the picture makes complete sense.
Definitely. I think you make some great points. Obviously, Kyle O'Reilly getting the big win at War Games. Clearly, obviously, he's been on some great momentum. Pete Dunne been fantastic since his return. And clearly, Damian Priest was out there just simply to set up this match with Karrion Kross for me. He was kind of a throwaway. He's almost like a red herring, really. And this week's NXT, we're going to get Pete Dunne and Kyle O'Reilly, number one contender. For me, if I was booking it, I'd love to see this go to a no contest. Let's make this a triple threat at New Year's Eve or in January. Let's do that, because that'd be a pay-per-view match. I'm getting the feeling clearly they don't want to do this Karrion Kross Finn Balor match already, because the problem is with it is they can't book Karrion Kross for a loss at the moment. They're clearly very high on Karrion Kross still, and they don't want to take the belt off Balor. The only way you could get away with this, I think, the dream match for me would be Demon Finn Balor versus Karrion Kross. I think that's the money match really, but you don't want to do it with 2 or 3 weeks build. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I do agree that you don't want to have Balor or Cross lose with what they're doing with both guys. But I actually thought that's what they were going to do. Like the way that Scarlett came out and confronted Balor, the idea of doing a one-on-one match between Damian Priest and Karrion Kross didn't even cross my mind. Even when Priest called out Scarlett, it seemed like out of the guys in the ring, Priest is the most vocal in terms of doing something. I thought it was really to set up a fatal four-way that Karrion Kross would wind up winning, and then we would see him and Balor. But yeah, as we saw later on in the show, it looks like that's not the direction they're going because of what Damian Priest said to Scarlett. Karrion Kross felt the need to make an appearance himself later on, and I'm already spoiling something that happens later.
That's all right, don't worry. I almost got the feeling with the whole thing with Balor and Scarlett. It was almost Scarlett saying to Balor, "Your time will come. Eventually, your time will come." But that's what they get for making Karrion Kross such a good contender already. This guy, fantastic. The build up to him before he got injured was just ridiculous. And Finn Balor's been a great champion. So if they do that triple threat match at New Year's Evil, I'm a fan of it. If they do either Pete Dunne versus Balor, I'm a fan of it. I'm a fan of Kyle O'Reilly. Whoever it's going to be, that's going to be a fantastic world title match, 100%.
It's important to have Scarlett at least acknowledge that Finn Balor is holding the title that Karrion Kross never lost.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's obviously there's a lot going on in this opening segment. It was like, what the hell have I just seen a bit? But it was fun. They delivered a lot in the first segment. We then obviously get sort of backstage Pete Dunne. Dunne asked about challenging Balor. And then we obviously get him blindsided by Killian Dane. This was obviously clearly designed just to sort of build up the revenge from the other week. It was an okay segment. Didn't really do too much. What were your thoughts?
I mean, I didn't know when we were going to see Dane again because I didn't understand what his storyline injuries were as a result of being slammed in a car door. But, I mean, Pete Dunne, I do think, given what I was saying about the beginning of the show, Pete Dunne is a guy who was coming off of a loss at War Games, and which is different than Kyle O'Reilly. And I mean, Karrion Kross was injured, but he didn't lose either. But yeah, Pete Dunne's one of those guys where why was he deserve a title shot? So you do need a match where you can kind of show, okay, this is the kind of fighter we're working with. This is why he could be considered a top title contender.
Definitely. Obviously, this was just done to build the main event up, which I think is clever. You're letting the people know what they're going to get kind of late in the night already, which is sensible to a certain point. We then went into a match. We had Jake Atlas facing Isaiah Swerve Scott. A really fun match. It was interesting. Jake Atlas getting his 3rd win on the trot. This guy's been on a bit of a run recently, or 2nd win on the trot, shall we say. Actually, no, 3rd win on the trot, actually. This was a rematch as well. Actually, no, it wasn't actually. Sorry, start again. No, Jake Atlas, this was his 2nd win on the trot. Beat Tony Nese last week, got this win now. Interesting enough, at the end of it, we then had Isaiah Swerve Scott almost teasing a heel turn. What was your thoughts this match and the potential?
Yeah, I mean, dude, Jake Atlas is sort of what we're saying about Cedric Alexander on Raw. Jake Atlas is kind of finding his identity a little bit, coming into his own. Isaiah Swerve Scott, that's a guy we haven't talked about too much, but I knew him back when he was Shane Swerve Strickland. Incredible wrestler. And I mean, do you turn him heel? What do you do with him? They're trying to figure out what they're going to do with him, with Swerve. He's got a lot of marketability, and he's also extremely versatile in the ring, so I hope they do something good. I'm interested to see what they do with Atlas. I don't know. I mean, I do think that there are actually elements of Jake Atlas that are marketable as well, in ways that you haven't explored that much in the past with other wrestlers. And we'll see if they take that route with him.
The thing is, I think he's clearly going to be going to the Cruiserweight Championship. Obviously, we've seen him face Santos Escobar twice. We saw it at Halloween Havoc earlier in October. We also saw it back at the start of November where he lost twice. Maybe they want to give that Cruiserweight title a defense, if that makes sense. We don't see it enough on TV, so I'd be a fan of that. That would be a great match, but really you have to pay it off now. If you are going to give Jake Atlas this win streak, he's won 2 matches now. It makes sense for him to go all the way and win that belt. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, I mean that would be an interesting change of pace because they're not doing a whole lot with the Santos Escobar stuff. So that like they need to do something with it. I mean, I don't know, but see, wait, when we talk about that really quick, there's also this weird dynamic how Jordan Devlin is quote unquote the rightful cruiserweight champion defending the title over in NXT UK, which is a totally different situation.
Definitely altogether. I'd agree with you. We then went backstage. We had a promo for Tommaso Ciampa. Tommaso Ciampa mentions the night before against Thatcher, where he got the win. And then we get Cameron Grimes. Interesting dynamic. Obviously, they had a match announced, so it's just kind of building the match up. Did you think much of the promo in the segment?
Not too much. Like, I mean, I no, I'm already thinking about the match now and like what they're doing with Grimes.
Yeah, no, well said. We then went into a fantastic triple threat tag team match. We had Imperium, Grizzled Young Veterans, and Everrise. Very fun match. Really, really enjoyed it. And we got Grizzled Young Veterans get the win. Massive win for them. Almost got the impression they're going to be going on to face the tag team champions a little bit, but I hope so after that. It was a fun match.
Yeah, I mean, it was good seeing Grizzled Young Veterans come back, the week before, and they needed a definitive win. They needed to kind of put themselves on the map and beating, I mean, with Everrise, especially with Matt Martell of that team, you can kind of make an argument of whether they've been taken legitimately. Imperium, very much so, have been a legitimate tag team on NXT. And, people who don't watch NXT UK, this could be for them, one of their first time seeing Zach Gibson and James Drake. And I think it was important to show them win. It was a strong win, and that's the way that you need to portray those guys if you're going to set them up for the title shot.
Definitely, I think it's going to be an interesting match. I think the heel dynamic may be interesting, heel tag team match, but hope they go all the way. Really, as I said, a massive fan of that tag team, so I hope to see it.
Yeah.
We then had a fantastic promo where we had sort of a promo video of the Takeover War Games casualties. Really liked it. Really liked the way they built up what happened the night before. Loved the whole way that they sold the injuries and stuff, and I think it was fantastic. I think if anybody hasn't seen that match, as we said earlier in the show, definitely check it out. What was your thoughts of the promo? Did you know?
Yeah, I mean, like it was great. I thought it was a good follow up to the match because, all the girls are talking about it. Like you don't have them necessarily break character, but there's not this sense of this is. I get the sense from all of them that that's what they actually thought about the match as professional wrestlers, not just as their characters. And I mean, yeah, those girls went through hell. Like when you told me that Candice LeRae got injured, I think my response was like, I'm surprised every woman in that match isn't injured because there were some violent spots in there to where I've talked in the past about how when I was a wrestler, I wrestled kind of a conservative style. And I think at least one spot that every woman did in that match, I could find something that said, yeah, nope, I would never do that. There's no way I would. Like they took some crazy stuff, man.
Yeah, definitely. We then went backstage with Mackenzie, and we had Mackenzie and Tony Storm. Tony Storm basically it was a promo designed based to build up a match between her and Ember Moon. What I'm interested to see is they're clearly hinting these two are going to be like kind of number one contender, which doesn't make sense following up what happened at War Games. Obviously, War Games, Raquel Gonzalez kind of got the big win here. I think this is a side feud just to sort of be filler. And I think it was a fun promo. I like the way they're building this match up probably for New Year's Eve in January. What were your thoughts of the promo?
Yeah, I don't really know either. Like why Ember Moon would suddenly be in line to be a contender for the title, considering that we've seen Ember Moon lose a little bit of her mojo.
She's been jobbing since she came back.
We've seen her lose her mojo, right? And then her team lost in the War Games match. Tony Storm she's right off the edge of a comeback too. I mean, even though her team won, Raquel Gonzalez looks like the one who logically would be in line for it, considering that she literally pinned the NXT Women's Champion in that War Games match.
They're doing a Bobby Lashley type push for Gonzalez, in my view. I think the build is very, very similar. The fact that she doesn't really lose. Occasionally she lost to Ripley and stuff, but pretty unstoppable. But we'll go into that at the end of the show. We then had sort of Tommaso Ciampa, Cameron Grimes. Very fun match. We had Timothy Thatcher sort of make a cameo during it. I liked it. I thought it was an entertaining match. Interesting element at the end of the match. We had Tyler Rust almost get up. Ciampa obviously managed to ignore distraction and get the win. I like the way that they're getting this whole Ciampa and Thatcher thing, and I like the Tyler Rust thing. It's a really good question mark to what's going on with this feud. I think, do we think the whole Tommaso Ciampa, Timothy Thatcher feud's done, or is this something that's going to carry on to New Year's Evil?
Yeah, that's the thing. I thought it was definitely done. I thought with Ciampa beating Thatcher, I was like, all right, the match was decent. Like I said, I felt bad they had to follow the women's War Games match, but and then Ciampa gets the win, and I thought they were going to kind of move Ciampa on and probably move Thatcher and this like hard ass wrestling trainer character onto something else. But it looks like they're not done with each other. But I will say the Cameron Grimes, I thought they might actually have Cameron Grimes beat Dexter Lumis at War Games, and they had him lose, and then they got him looking like a total joke. I mean, I think the only person who looks more like a joke and not taken seriously than Matt Riddle is Cameron Grimes as far as WWE TV is concerned this week.
Yeah, he's been destroyed. He's losing every single week. And I think even at the end of it, when you're thinking he's going to get some momentum, Timothy Thatcher takes him out as well, which is
right.
It makes him look like
it's
a total
like
joke.
Everyone kicks his ass. He's gotten his ass kicked by 3 different guys this week.
It's just a carry on, isn't it? Let's be fair though. So with Cameron Grimes, he's a fun act. He's a comedy act. Would you like to see him in the 24 title? Basically, could you see him sort of making that step up? I think he's a fun. I wasn't a massive fan of him at first, but he's really kind of grown on me. Would you like to see him in the 24 title? If he comes up to main roster.
You could do that, but I mean, when you get relegated to the 24/7 title, how much of a niche do you find yourself in? How much of a hole do you find yourself in that you can't really crawl out of? No, see, what I would like, because he's not a bad performer in the ring, I wouldn't mind for there to be, whether it's a babyface turn at some point, I wouldn't mind seeing a more serious side to him where he stops acting like such a fool, or as MVP would say, a clown, and he gets more serious about it, and there's a different attitude to him when he's in the ring wrestling. I think that in terms of a long-term character, yeah, you can't. Right now he's almost like, as weird as this is going to sound, he's almost like a redneck Disco Inferno. And
yeah. What a comparison.
Yeah, and Disco never had that moment really to where he had to buckle down and get serious, and that's what you need with these characters to kind of take them. Because if not, Disco Inferno's one. Yeah, you use the 24/7 title analogy. He could be like a redneck R-Truth, to where R-Truth is not really ever taken seriously either. Yeah, but Cameron Grimes is much earlier in his career than R-Truth is. That's the thing. And you kind of have to ask the question, where does this character go long-term? Where do we want this guy as a performer to go long-term?
Josh, what's quite unbelievable about Cameron Grimes, he said he's been jobbing a lot. This guy actually got a submission victory over Kushida back in November, as recent as that. He's beat Jake Atlas. Earlier in the year, he was able to get victories over Damian Priest back in July. And stuff like that, or back in June as well. And he's also he actually beat Finn Balor. This guy's got a victory over Finn Balor.
Right.
He's fallen so far down the card. It's just crazy.
That's the thing. Because, Cameron Grimes for a while was one of the guys they seem to be pushing the most. Yeah. And that's what makes it so striking that this week alone, he's lost to 2 people and he got beat up by another guy.
So he beats Finn Balor in May. He's then able to beat Bronson Reed in May. He's then able to beat Damian Priest in June. How does he go? And then he beats Kushida. Yet he's now not able to win sort of matches, and he's just getting jobbed. But I want to see him lose to Ciampa, so I'll say that. But the Dexter Lumis thing, I think he definitely should have got the win for 100%.
I thought he was. That was my prediction, was that they were going to have Grimes win, because at that point he hadn't beaten Lumis at all. I thought they were going to give him at least one win. But plus Dexter Lumis wasn't even seen on NXT this week.
Yeah, no, exactly. They didn't follow up, which is just unusual. But
yeah,
really weird. But going forward, let's go on to something really weird. So we've got this vignette of Xia Li, and obviously she's with Boa again. They're getting beaten up and they're bloody, very graphic, very, very weird. This has been going on since October. And if we look at the history of it, obviously they started getting letters. We didn't really know what was going on. We then get this master come out, dragons on the screen. And then obviously they're now in this warehouse. And every time we see it, it looks like sort of Boa and Xia Li have been out on a cocaine spree all night, or out on the town for a week with no sleep. And then the end of it this time, we're getting sort of what appears to be a woman with face paint, almost like Su Yan, looking a bit like Su Yan. This is really, really weird. I've got an idea where it's probably going, but I'll leave it over to you, Josh. You can say what you think, and then I'll go with what I think.
Man, so the first thing I'll say is about it. I watched NXT a couple of days later, but this segment you sent to me to kind of watch. That was the first thing that I watched in the show. You sent me a clip of it from online, and you already said something about how they did a segment with Boa and Xia Li, but I was not expecting to see what I saw. I mean, honestly, sometimes people always talk about the things in wrestling you like the most, or the things where you sit back and say, wait, all right, so I know a lot of things in wrestling are fake, but that had to be real. And I was doing that with this segment because so much of it looked real. Like, I don't know how much of the blood was fake. I know the kendo stick shots on Boa were real. I know when Xia Li, they had a point where she was kicking this like wooden pole, and I've seen them do like shin exercises in certain types of martial arts, to where you can see the contusion, or like if you've ever hit your leg, you can see the mark on her shin bone where she was actually doing it. So it makes me wonder, I mean, was the stuff where she was punching, was she really doing that too? I don't know if Boa and Xia Li, before they got into wrestling, have some sort of background in those forms of martial arts to where they can handle it, or whether they had somebody on hand, like a MMA expert, who was kind of walking them through how to legitimately do those things. And all that, the bruises and the blood you saw were real. But yeah, even by WWE standards, I mean, I know they're PG, but they kind of go beyond that every now and then. That was very violent for what WWE put on nowadays.
Yeah, it was.
And I thought that in a fresh way.
I think the thing with it, I think what's great about it is the longevity. It's been done so fantastic. One of my favorite things probably in WWE at the moment is this storyline. Every week we're getting a little bit more. It's sort of fresh. We still don't really know where the end game is. I like the way that it's getting more and more graphic. I wish we saw more stuff like this on the main roster, where you've got that cliffhanger to carry on watching next week to get that slowly reveal. In terms of a payoff for me, the obvious payoff, it has to probably be Karen G, soon to be Karen Kwan, if you believe the dirt sheets this week. I think, but the payoff for that, they're making this Karen Kwan seem up there, almost like you're instantly going to fear her, and you're going to get Xia Li and also Boa kind of maybe with a new stable. Do we think that the end game of this is going to be a stable, or is it just going to be sort of Karen Q debuting straight to win the women's title probably?
No, I mean, like, it seems like, I don't know how many people will be there, but a comparison that I have is that, it's almost like a Chinese Dungeon of Doom, and the taskmaster of it is Karen Kwan. And I mean, I don't know. I will tell you, a lot of people seem to know who she is. I don't really know much about Karen Q. I haven't really seen much of her work, so I don't know who we're working with, as a performer and stuff like that, if she is worth that big of a deal to kind of bring her in that way and have her lead other wrestlers. But I mean, yeah, just based off. So basically, all I know about her is what I've seen in these vignettes. I'm expecting a hell of a lot right now if she's being brought in that way.
Definitely. I think the thing is, obviously, she was in the Mae Young Classic before. Massive way to come in. I'm interested to see what the payoff is and where they go. Interested to see if Mercedes Martinez is in this scenario in some capacity. But for me, I think we definitely have to get a stable. I think this stable have to come in at the top. I'm really liking this. I'm interested to see where they go next. Interested to see how they can keep it going. And yeah, it's so much fun. I think it's great. Really, really massive fan of this. I'd like to see where the end game is with this. I like the whole way with letters and stuff. They really need to start paying that off for me, and hopefully the storyline's going to match. But credits to WWE and NXT. This has been fantastic. One of my favorite things of the week by far.
Yeah,
definitely. Have you got anything else to add before we go into the next segment?
I'm just looking forward to seeing where they go with it too, because I mean they're setting the bar very high. I will say, I mean, WWE has a very bad history of setting a bar to a certain height. I mean, look at the debut of Retribution and then quickly losing it. So I hope with this angle or the stable, they can find a way to maintain where they've brought it,
Would you, just last thing I was going to kind of say on this, would you have been a fan of them doing similar vignettes for Retribution before they debuted? I think they I don't know why they haven't done something similar.
It could have been good. I mean, when they first debuted, it didn't make sense to do that because the idea was that Retribution was this outside group who was coming in completely unknown to WWE. Whereas, like, the stuff we're seeing with Xia Li and Boa and Karen Kwan is that WWE, NXT are aware of it. They're just kind of following it as an observer. So it might not have necessarily made sense with Retribution, but where Retribution are at now with WWE contracts, like, I think it could have been something to kind of throw in a different flavor, a different seasoning to the whole thing, possibly.
I think just more the PG-13 element of it. The way you could have done it is you could have had, obviously, Mustafa Ali is a hacker, supposedly. You could have done that he hacks over the camera to a certain point, and then you got this vignette of this group beating somebody up, attacking somebody, whatever. But that's another tangent anyway. But yeah. Do you want to go on anything else, or should we go into the next segment?
Well, yeah, let's talk about what happens next. Where are
Okay.
we going?
Okay. Next we had the Johnny Gargano, Candice LeRae, Austin Theory, Indy Hartwell. Very fun segment. Clearly, obviously, building up this new stable called The Way. Massive fan of this. Really enjoyed it. I thought Candice and Gargano were almost like the parents, and that was almost like they were proud of their kids at a prom night or something like that. But fun element. I've got one kind of small criticism. Obviously, at War Games, we had 12 ghost faces. Yet there's no mention of the numbers here. I just don't get why WWE were able to have 12 ghost faces at War Games with no explanation. Yet they're only paying it off with one reveal here. I felt it was stupid. I think they should have done that ghost face. They should have done just one ghost face at War Games rather than 12. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I messaged you about this. I do find it very funny how ever since he turned heel, Johnny and Candice have been portrayed as these people who are pretty obnoxious about this Gargano way, like how they've rubbed a lot of people in NXT the wrong way. They don't really have any friends. And yet suddenly Johnny Gargano is able to call upon 20 different guys to come out dressed as Ghostface. Like, who the hell were these guys? John, nobody likes Johnny, and suddenly he's got all the help in the world that he needs. That was a downside, but with this segment, what I did like, by the way, hold on, wait, before I do anything else, we got to give it up for George Jones for absolutely calling that Austin Theory would be the ghost face. You deserve props on that.
It's not just me. I think I'll give him credit. I think SCW, Steve Chats Wrestling, he also said it as well. I think he thank you for the props. I think it was a good choice, and I think that was a clever move. Made sense.
And see, this segment we get on NXT was the first time seeing all of them together. We've seen Indy Hartwell being revealed in the past, but there was still, a mystery out on if there was another ghost face, and then we found out there was, and who is it? But this is our first time seeing all four of them together in this, I don't know if you call it a stable or what it is.
It's interesting. It gives them something to do. I think what was quite fun was the end of the same segment. So clearly we get Damian Priest come out, which makes sense. And then what then happens, obviously, is we get Karrion Kross come out and attack Damian Priest from behind. Karrion Kross absolutely destroys Damian Priest and then goes off to the arena and he just drives off. For me, I was a fan of sort of the end of it. I'm a bit disappointed they gave Karrion Kross away this week. I think they should have delayed that. It's great to see him back. This is just building the match between Damian Priest and Karrion Kross, which I get. But yeah, overall, it's a good segment. You're getting a new stable here, and I think a lot happened in this. But for me, Karrion Kross was up near the top of the card. You don't want him sort of being dragged into this sort of stupid stable, really.
Yeah, I mean, they were trying to swerve people a little bit as a thing, and I think you can make the argument that it was done pretty well because at the beginning of the show, you have Scarlett come out, and the assumption is, Scarlett usually when she appears alone because Karrion Kross is not there. And you just saw a vignette for him, at TakeOver, and you think, he's coming back, but we don't really know when he's going to be back officially. It might not be till New Year's Evil.
Yeah.
And so you think when Damian Priest comes out later on in the show, you do actually, I think most fans believed he was coming out just to call out Johnny Gargano. So in that context of that segment, Karrion Kross truly comes from out of nowhere. So they had set it up like he wasn't there. And you think that Damian Priest is out there for something completely different, a guy he's had a feud with for a pretty good bit. And so that's where your focus is. So really, I don't think many people saw Kross coming right then and there.
I've got a couple of key points I would say with you, Josh. I'd say that the fact that the return wasn't a big spectacle. Karrion Kross, before he left, there was such a big buzz about his entrances and the whole big return and whatever else. I expected something a bit more sinister for him to return. I expected a build up. Let's build it up over 2 or 3 weeks. Why not? Why are we getting him just coming out with no music or anything? He came out with music, but it wasn't really. I don't think he came out. It wasn't very much, was it? He came out. There wasn't a big reaction as such. But why would he go after Damian Priest other than the insult early in the show? Damian Priest is a guy that couldn't get the North American title. He's a guy that's been jobbing. This guy his focus should be the world title. Surely he never lost the belt properly.
I mean, I do agree, and
I know you don't want to book that. I know they don't want to book that match. As I said earlier in the show, I understand they don't want to book that sort of Finn Balor, Karrion Kross match because they feel like they're booked into a corner. But for me, I don't get why, other than the insult, as you said, that was at the start of the show. Why is Karrion Kross's focus Damian Priest? For me, this feels like a placeholder until the next takeover. Obviously, clearly, they don't want to give the Finn Balor Karrion Kross match away already.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how, as far as we can tell, the only motivation Kross had to attack Damian Priest is you said something to my girl. That's literally it. Because, I mean, compared to the other guys in that opening segment, that's the only thing that Damian Priest did. Well, Finn Balor did too, actually. Finn Balor said a little one-liner to Scarlett as well. But yeah, I mean that's the only thing that Priest did. And so I mean, I don't know. I will say, to kind of answer what you were just talking about, apparently NXT Creative decided that the shock factor of having him suddenly pop up unannounced was worth sacrificing, not giving him a build up and not giving, or maybe it's because, you know, Karrion Kross is still relatively new to NXT, and he already had that debut where he had the long build up and stuff like that. So maybe they thought, like if we do that again, where it's just a series of vignettes and promos, that was literally done this year. And so there's no need for that.
I've got 1 or 2 points here. 1 or 2 key things. One theory I've got is he's going up to the main roster soon. They don't want to give him the world title because they want him up in the main roster probably in time for WrestleMania, the Rumble. I think that's maybe one why you wouldn't put him in the world title. The other one, Keith Finn, they're meant to be in a ratings war with AEW. Surely you want to build his return should have been something to use in the ratings war to go against Sting and whatever else they're doing, like Kenny Omega and whatever else. I think that was a missed opportunity in my opinion, really.
I mean, yeah, you can make that argument. You could.
Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
Wasn't an argument, but that's fine.
Yeah.
We then went into this main event. We had, or not, it wasn't even a main event actually. It was a quite a big match. We had Pete Dunne versus Killian Dane. Killian Dane even, yeah. Fun
Dunne
match.
Versus Dane. Yeah.
Dunne versus Dane. That's a tongue twister. Very fun match. 2 of the British wrestlers against each other. Good, very fun match. Really, really enjoyed it. Clearly, we've got Pete Dunne get the win here. It makes sense, obviously, for him to get the win. He's going to be going into the number 1 contendership match on next week's NXT. This was just a fun match. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my only concern going in, like, obviously Pete Dunne needs the win because of what I was saying before about how you need to give him something strong to come off a loss from the War Games match. But you have to be careful when wrestling a guy like Killian Dane. And I when they first came out, my question was, are they actually going to have him hit the bitter end on a guy who's literally looks like twice his size? And they did. And I mean, I could tell right away how much Dane helped Dunne on executing that spot. And I don't know if I necessarily like the precedent that Pete Dunne's going to continuously hit that move on people who are much bigger than he is. I think on this podcast at one point, I gave you the analogy of like what Lance told us about if you're going to come up with a finisher, do something that you can hit on the Big Show. And the bitter end does not meet that criteria. But Pete Dunne set a precedent this week that if he's in a match with the Big Show, he's still going to hit the bitter end. And because Killian Dane and the Big Show are as agile as they are, they're going to actually take it. Yeah, I mean, that was super strength from Pete Dunne, man.
It was a shock. They're clearly keeping him strong, which was good. But I thought this was fun. I think the only thing that's kind of missing really is the whole lack of Pat McAfee. That whole Pat McAfee stable element's kind of gone a bit, which I felt it was almost like War Games has done, that's done. But
yeah, I did get that vibe too.
That's only a small thing, but no, fun match. We then went kind of backstage. We had Leon Ruff, Johnny Gargano, Austin Theory, Kushida. This was just a promo basically to build up a match next week. For me, it looks like the NXT North American title, New Evil, it's going to be Kushida versus Gargano. That'll be fun, but this was an okay segment. That you're clearly getting an idea of where they're going to go next. What were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've said, I don't want to beat a dead horse too much because I've said it so many times on this show, but like Kushida's one of those people to where I just feel like he hasn't quite found that feud or that match to kind of really bring him up to the top status of NXT. But with Johnny wrestling, like if they're going to go that route, Johnny's a good guy who can not only put himself on the map, but he can put other people on the map. And yeah, I mean, I also thought it was good that like they gave Kushida's character something to actually fight for, in the sense that not only does he want a piece of Johnny Gargano, but he's willing to step in and help out Leon Ruff, who was in a pretty bad spot having to be in a handicap match with Theory and Gargano.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's going to be a hard match. I think clearly next week we're probably going to get the babyfaces win, but interested to see if the Curse of Gargano is going to lose eventually when they have that match at New Year's Evil. But no,
absolutely.
We then went into the main event. So this was Raquel Gonzalez versus Ember Moon. Very fun match. Kind of enjoyed it. We got Raquel Gonzalez get the win there. Obviously, after that, we had Toni Storm basically marching down to the ring. She basically stood over Ember Moon. Rhea Ripley came out to make the save. And clearly they're building up. I think it's Rhea Ripley, Toni Storm on next week's NXT. So that was the point of this. Looking at this then, so clearly Gonzalez is probably going to be the number 1 contender for the women's title. I think she's a good choice. Although she's had quite a few losses recently, you wouldn't think it. But looking at her win-loss record, she lost to Shotzi Blackheart back in December, the start in the ladder match, which was shocking. She lost to Rhea Ripley back in October, but she has obviously beat Ember Moon, and she won War Games. More importantly, for me, I would like to see her sort of go against Io Shirai. And I think for me, it's now probably time to take the belt off Io Shirai. So I'm really hoping Raquel Gonzalez, they follow through with it, really get the China sort of feel with her. She really reminds me of China, and I think she's got great potential. Wouldn't surprise me if she sort of is your next NXT Women's Champion, particularly if Rhea Ripley isn't going to sort of challenge anytime soon.
Yeah, like a couple of
What was
weeks
your
ago,
thoughts?
if you had told me that they're going to put Raquel Gonzalez in the place of the women's champion, I would have said, "Wait, why?" Because I hadn't really seen a lot from her, of note, because she's kind of more been the bodyguard for Dakota Kai. In the War Games match alone, from the second she came in there, I was like, my God, I was like, this woman's actually really good. And yeah, she looked like $1,000,000 in that match out of any woman in there. And then she gets the win too by pinning the champion. By the end of the match, I was like, all right, I mean, Raquel Gonzalez can go. And now you talk about the idea of putting the title on her. I would totally buy it. And it's so amazing how he says something about the level of performer that Raquel Gonzalez is, that she's able to just create that much momentum so fast.
It's amazing. I think it's just generally the size and the way they built her up and stuff. Clearly, they've done a great job of elevating her, which is really really good. Looking forward to seeing where it goes next. Clearly, NXT this week we announced a few things. It's going to be a fun show. So if we could give this score a rating, a show rating even, for me, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. They did a very good job of building stuff for next week. They answered a lot of stuff. There's a lot of intrigue. A lot of stuff happened. It was far more fun than Raw. But for me, definitely 8 out of 10. What was your score and rating, Josh? What was your thoughts?
Yeah, 8 sounds pretty good to me too. Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty good show. I mean, we saw a lot of stuff come along, and in contrast to Raw, we have a lot of reasons to watch this week's show too. Like we pretty much have the whole show laid out for us.
Yeah, definitely. Have you got anything else you want to add to Raw before we go to the final two news stories of this week's show?
No, man, let's talk about that stuff, because that's some good stuff to talk about. It's wow.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
the best way to describe it.
Okay, so what we've had is a recent story has broke kind of the last 48 hours that apparently Vince McMahon has lost his call with quite a few wrestlers on the main roster, some of them being Otis, Dalicator, Mace, and Omos, and most importantly, Keith Lee. So apparently what it means by Vince losing is sort of mood with them to a certain point is it means they're going to be sent back for extra training back to the Performance Center on Tuesday and Thursdays. The training is going to be with Adam Pearce and Drew Gulak, apparently. And apparently Arturo Ruiz is going to be there as well. For me, when I heard this news, I was really, really annoyed. I just don't know what they're kind of doing here. I think Keith Lee, he's been fantastic. He's been booked as a total joke since he came up from NXT. Besides his one win over Randy Orton, he's not been allowed to be on TV the last few weeks. He didn't really do anything on this week's Raw. He hasn't got a match for TLC. When we look at the other people, Otis, that was the guy you gave your money in the bank briefcase to. So I know you stripped it off him, but what were you doing giving the briefcase to him in the first place if you don't trust his work? Looking at the other people, Dabicator, I'm not really surprised. He was a Raw Underground sort of hero to a certain point, never really done anything since. Mace, I've quite enjoyed Mace's work. It's not really his fault. This further sort of cements Retribution as a joke to a certain point. And we're looking at Omos. Clearly, they want Omos to be in some sort of position to get involved on the road up to WrestleMania. So I think for me, I'm not surprised with it. I'm just shocked by Keith Lee. What are your thoughts?
Right, and that's the thing. So yeah, the other guys, Omos, Dabba-Kato, and Mace.
Yeah.
They're all three of those guys are green. Like, I mean, all three of those guys could have great careers in the future, but like everything they've done on TV, almost hasn't even had a match on TV. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Vince McMahon would say, oh, he needs more training, because clearly some matches they've seen him in that haven't been televised, he's looked pretty like a rookie, and stuff like that. He hasn't really found his place in the ring. Otis could go either way, because something that would surprise a lot of people, Otis's background is actually pretty similar to people like Kurt Angle and Chad Gable. He was a very, very good amateur wrestler in college, but Otis, I've heard there's been some spots on SmackDown to where he hasn't been looked at as safe. I mean, he does Scotty 2 Hotty's worm, but what else does he do when it comes to matches? But yeah, the big one on the list that makes you question everything is Keith Lee. And it makes you kind of wonder what exactly the hell is going on. Because the idea that they're sending guys down to the Performance Center to train and get more experience, Keith Lee was wrestling on the independents against tons of people and putting on 5-star matches for years. I don't know anything about him coming off as green. He's definitely not green. He's been in wrestling for a long time. I've never heard of him being unsafe in the ring. So I don't know what the hell Vince McMahon's talking about. I mean, the only thing I know is that Vince McMahon does, if Vince was the one that made this call to send Keith Lee back to Orlando to train, Vince, for some reason, has been the only person in the WWE who has been hard on Keith Lee. There's been speculation forever that the reason why Keith Lee went from wrestling in just like the tights, I thought he looked fine on NXT, to having to cover it up with like a hood or some kind of top is because Vince McMahon thought he just looked like some fat guy. And maybe Vince can't get over that visual. And so Vince, regardless of what Keith Lee's physically doing in the ring, just thinks this guy sucks. I don't know. I mean, I hope more comes out about this. But I mean, dude, if you put Keith Lee into some kind of training camp with Otis and Omos and those guys, Keith Lee's going to shine like crazy. I don't suspect this to last very long with him being sent back for some kind of remedial training. It absolutely blows my mind.
I think you make some really, really good points there. What I would say, a couple of key things I think that's hurt Keith Lee, the fact we haven't had fans. So when he debuted up on the main roster, there was nobody really there to sort of show Vince how over he is. I think the thing that really shocks me, really disappoints me, this guy was the NXT World Champion. What does that say for NXT? It makes NXT look like a pile of crap, really. I think it makes NXT look like a total joke. And Keith Lee, when you associate him with them names, it's just a joke, really. This guy, as you said, he had 5-star classics with Dominik Dijakovic on the independent scene regularly. And I think it's just a real shame. I really hope Keith Lee sort of recovers from this. Really, really disappointed by that news. And it really kind of shows what's wrong with WWE, that you're clearly putting people down. It shouldn't be down. The fact that you gave your money in the bank briefcase to somebody, yet you're now saying that it wasn't good enough, it just shows WWE don't know what the left hand, what the right hand's doing at the moment. I just think it's it doesn't bear well for going into WrestleMania season. I think if they're doing these type of mistakes and this type of attitude of just moving people for no reason, what hope have they got of stringing a successful build to WrestleMania next year?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, my hope is just, especially when it comes to Keith Lee, is that it won't last long. Or like, even though they sent them to this additional training, it doesn't mean they're pulled from Raw permanently. And so I just hope that they keep it up with Keith Lee, because it's only a matter of time till he gets another like breakout moment like he got at Survivor Series last year. I mean, and the thing is, there's so many legends and Hall of Famers who all the time talk about how your next star is Keith Lee. I mean, he can do everything. He can run with every type of ball that you give him. And I do hope that they continue to give him some kind of chance, because I mean, as long as they have some level of faith in him, he'll be able to do it. I mean, he's that great of a performer.
Yeah, definitely. I've got one last kind of point I'd say about it before we move on to the final story. I think, what does that say about WWE, though? The fact that all your ex-NXT World Champions, pretty much, you've destroyed. Aleister Black, he's not even on TV. You destroyed him. Nakamura, he's nothing more than a tag team wrestler. He was fantastic in NXT, destroyed. The list is kind of endless. They've got this habit of taking these NXT champions, people such as Andrade, and they're making them total jokes. Does this show that WWE is broken kind of from the top now?
So I was going to message this to you after we do this episode, but I'm going to go ahead and say it to you on the air right now, because we don't have enough time to talk about all this right now. But honestly, you and I could do a full episode of a show where we talk about this concept. So NXT, even though it's kind of evolved into being a third brand, the entire point of the Performance Center and developmental and NXT is to get wrestlers ready for the main roster of either on Raw or SmackDown. We could do an entire episode about how effective the Performance Center and NXT are at that. Or does it completely not do that job? Are there more examples of how people who fare very well in NXT wind up floundering on Raw or SmackDown? And I mean, people who maybe they're not anything special in NXT, they wind up finding a great spot on Raw or SmackDown. There might be a couple of examples of that. But yeah, how effective is developmental? Does it actually develop anybody? You know, that's the topic we could talk about, because yeah, we could do an entire episode on this, because you can list hundreds of examples of this.
Let's do that. Let's put that in. So we'll definitely do that in a couple of weeks. We'll do a topic, as you said, we'll cover that. I think there's a lot to go with that, but I'm going to move forward.
Absolutely.
before we really get into it. So the last topic tonight, it's regarding the direction of Roman Reigns for WrestleMania. So as of right now in December, apparently WWE haven't got any names scheduled for Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. Apparently the early rumors were going to be The Rock. The Rock has apparently declined it. He doesn't want to be there with no fans. They're looking at a 2022 WrestleMania for The Rock. So the names that are obviously being thrown around this week are Goldberg, unfortunately following his sort of WWE sort of bump cameo where he basically called out the Roman Reigns. The other one that's been called out is Daniel Bryan. And that's kind of the two apparently they've got for WrestleMania, which for me, I think Goldberg, I'm not a fan of it. I really hope it doesn't happen. Daniel Bryan versus Roman Reigns, it'll be okay. The problem you've got is much like you got with Drew McIntyre, you're keeping Roman Reigns so strong. He's the most protected wrestler on the whole roster, doesn't lose to anybody. For me, you're going to have to do an awful lot of work to build someone up now to beat him at Mania or at least challenge him. What's your thoughts on the names and where do you think they're going to go with this?
I mean, at first, like, I wanted The Rock. I mean,
Yeah.
given everything they're setting up with this Samoan dynasty with Jey Uso and whatnot, The Rock, as, the biggest member of that Anoa'i family Samoan dynasty, makes sense to kind of come in and be the one to finally shut up Roman Reigns. But as disappointed as I was when I heard that's not the direction they're going right now, I understood how, this could be one of the biggest matches in years, and you don't want to give that away in the Thunderdome or whatever.
No, fair
And
point.
so it does make sense to me. However, Goldberg, I just don't see what he has left to prove himself. Like, I'm looking at it from Goldberg's perspective. What does he have left to prove in wrestling? I think the one thing that he's proven, and I mean this with all due respect to who Goldberg was at one point, he's proven that he's actually a liability in the ring over the last couple of years. Not just that he embarrasses himself, but he's come very close to hurting Undertaker and whatnot. I mean, a lot of people have said after the Saudi Arabia match, Goldberg should have taken that as indication that, like, all right, so I clearly can't go the way I used to could, and I actually could wind up hurting somebody, so it's time to kind of call it quits. And yet Goldberg keeps coming back and doing more and more. I think when it comes to WrestleMania, I do the spear better than you. You're going to build an entire feud off of that.
It's what they wanted to do last year at Mania. Last year's Mania was going to be Goldberg Roman, wasn't it? And then it got pulled because of COVID, and obviously Braun had to step in. But this is a guy here that got destroyed by Braun. His only recent claim to fame really is destroying Brock Lesnar. He killed the Fiend Street. The Fiend's never been the same since, in my opinion. I'm quite strong about that. And for me, I'm not a fan of this. I think you're going into this, and if Goldberg's the one that beats Roman Reigns, I just think it would be absolutely criminal.
It would kill everything.
I'm really hoping that the underlying storyline probably with this, if The Rock is going to be there potentially, I hope I'm wrong and I hope he is there. That'd be great. For me, I think the other one you have to do is Big E, really. Big E, you're doing a slow sort of job building up SmackDown. He's the one wrestler for me that I think it could be a main eventer by WrestleMania if you give him the right build. For me, if it's Goldberg Roman, this isn't WrestleMania worthy. I saw that sort of name this week and I was thinking, I'm not looking forward to WrestleMania if that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, the other name you brought up was Daniel Bryan. I wouldn't mind that at all. For number one, Daniel Bryan's a great wrestler. Number two, ever since he's come out of retirement, Daniel Bryan, he had that top run as a heel WWE champion, but people have always wondered if Daniel Bryan is ever capable of capturing any of that magic that he had from the original Yes movement.
Yep.
And I wouldn't mind seeing him given another shot to be, that guy. I'm not sure, I know he's got some injuries that he's dealt with, so I'm not sure if he's still able to perform on that level. But if he is, I'm here for it. Yeah, I wouldn't mind it. Yeah, I'll take, well, hold on. That's in general. That's just Daniel Bryan by himself. Now, if it's Daniel Bryan or Goldberg, I will take Daniel Bryan any day. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it'd be interesting. I think clearly whatever they're going to do, whoever they're going to have face Roman, they're going to have to make him at that credible level. But that was kind of it, really. That was kind of all that we kind of had for this week in terms of news. I thank everybody kind of standing around for watching the video for the length we've done. Is there anything else you want to add, Josh, before we wrap the show up tonight?
No, man, we can go ahead and wrap it up because, I mean, here's the thing, dude. We've given people a lot to work with on this episode. I mean, there's been a lot more discussion than we normally have, and I think that's wonderful. But yeah, I mean, we've unpacked a lot.
Oh, brilliant. I hope you've all enjoyed the content. Thank you for coming on again, Josh. It's been fun. We'll have to be back next week. Worth waiting for this week, definitely. But this has been Jonesy Chats Wrestling, joined by Josh Hayes. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Please give it a share. Please tell your friends. We want to grow the channel. And yeah, thank you for watching and have a good evening. Thanks for coming on again, Josh.
Absolutely. My pleasure, man.
Thank you.